The moment Elena Moore slapped away the married financier's hand in front of 300 Manhattan elites, she sealed her fate, though not the way anyone expected. Across the ballroom, a man who'd built an empire on fear and precision watched her with something more dangerous than anger: recognition. Victor Romano didn't believe in accidents, and he never, ever shared what belonged to him. Tonight, he just decided Elena belonged to him, whether she knew it yet or not. The only question was how long it would take her to realize she'd already chosen him the moment she refused to bow. Have you ever stood your ground when everything told you to run? Drop a like and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Elena's story travels as she discovers that sometimes the most dangerous man in the room is the only one who truly sees you. The crystal chandeliers of the Meridian Club cast prismatic light across the marble floors, turning the entire ballroom into a carefully orchestrated dream. Elena Moore stood near the entrance to the main hall, her tablet tucked against her chest, mentally running through the 17 remaining items on her checklist. The annual Sinclair Foundation Gala was the club's most prestigious event, and after 3 years as lead event director, Elena had learned that perfection wasn't optional, it was expected. She wore a simple black dress that spoke of professionalism rather than seduction, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek chignon that showed off the elegant line of her neck. She'd chosen the outfit deliberately, attractive enough to blend with the glittering crowd, modest enough to remind everyone she was staff, not a guest. In a room full of Manhattan's wealthiest and most powerful, that distinction mattered. Ms. Moore. One of the catering managers appeared at her elbow, slightly breathless. The caviar service for the VIP lounge, there's been a mix-up with the beluga. Elena didn't flinch. Show me. She followed him through the service corridor, her heels clicking efficiently against polished stone. This was what she did. She anticipated problems, solved them before they became visible, and ensured that the wealthy men and women who paid obscene membership fees never had to witness anything as vulgar as effort. The Meridian Club existed to provide seamless luxury, and Elena had become invaluable because she understood that invisibility was power. The caviar crisis took 12 minutes to resolve. By the time Elena returned to the ballroom, the string quartet had begun playing, and guests had started arriving in earnest. She positioned herself near one of the side columns, watching everything with the trained eye of someone who'd learned to read a room the way others read balance sheets. That's when she first felt it, the weight of observation. Elena had been stared at before. In her line of work, men looked. Some looked with appreciation, others with calculation, a few with barely disguised hunger. She'd developed the ability to deflect attention without acknowledging it, to make herself functionally invisible even when standing in plain sight. This felt different. This felt like being studied. She scanned the room, searching for the source, but the crowd had thickened. Donors in designer gowns, financiers in bespoke suits, socialites draped in jewels that cost more than Elena's annual salary, all moving through the carefully choreographed social dance of New York's elite. Whoever was watching had vanished into the beautiful chaos. Elena shook off the sensation and returned to work. By 8:30, the gala had achieved the particular rhythm of success: champagne flowing, conversations building, the string quartet providing elegant background noise while waiters circulated with precision. Elena was coordinating the transition to dinner service when Gregory Hartwell appeared beside her. She recognized him immediately. Senior partner at Hartwell and Associates, major club benefactor, married to a pharmaceutical heiress who was currently across the room discussing art acquisitions. Elena had dealt with men like Gregory Hartwell for years, entitled, assured of their importance, accustomed to being indulged. "You're doing a magnificent job tonight," he said, his smile too familiar. "Everything is absolutely perfect." "Thank you, Mr. Hartwell." Elena kept her voice professional, her body language closed. "We're pleased you're enjoying the evening." "I always enjoy events you manage." He moved closer, invading her personal space with the casual presumption of someone who'd never been told no. "You have such exquisite attention to detail, such refined taste." Elena stepped back smoothly, creating distance. "If you'll excuse me, I need to check on the dinner arrangements." His hand caught her wrist. The touch was light but unmistakable. Fingers circling her wrist, thumb pressing against her pulse point. Proprietary, possessive. The kind of touch that erased boundaries and declared ownership. "Don't rush off, Gregory said, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was seductive. "I've been watching you all evening, baby. The way you move through this crowd, so competent, so controlled. It's incredibly attractive." Elena's entire body went rigid. The word, baby, landed like a slap. Not her name, not even a generic term of professional respect, a diminutive designed to reduce her to something owned, something cute and manageable. She looked down at his hand on her wrist, then up at his face with an expression of such cold fury that Gregory's smile faltered. "Remove your hand." Elena's voice cut through the ambient noise with surgical precision. "Now." I am not your baby. I am not your anything." She pulled her wrist free with deliberate force. "I am Ms. Moore, the event director, and you have exactly 3 seconds to step back before I have security escort you out of this gala, regardless of how much money you've donated." The color drained from Gregory's face as he realized they'd attracted attention. Several nearby guests had turned, their conversations faltering. A waiter had frozen mid-service, eyes wide. "You're overreacting," Gregory hissed, trying to salvage the situation. "I was paying you a compliment. You were being inappropriate and disrespectful. There's a difference." Elena's voice remained perfectly level, perfectly professional, devastating in its clarity. "Touch any staff member again, and your membership will be reviewed. Are we clear?" Gregory's jaw worked soundlessly for a moment before he turned and stalked away, nearly colliding with a waiter. The guests who'd witnessed the exchange quickly looked away, pretending absorption in their champagne and canapes. Within seconds, the incident would be transformed into gossip, scandalous, entertaining, ultimately meaningless. Elena's hands were shaking slightly as she smoothed her dress, forcing her breathing back to normal. She'd handled men like Gregory before, but the public nature of the confrontation made her nervous. The Meridian Club valued discretion above all else. What she'd just done was necessary, but potentially costly. She needed air. Elena slipped through a side door into one of the service hallways, pressing her back against the cool wall and closing her eyes. The muffled sounds of the gala filtered through, laughter, music, the civilized murmur of wealth entertaining itself. She'd just jeopardized her position for the sake of drawing a line that most staff wouldn't have dared draw. But she couldn't regret it. She wouldn't regret it. That was impressive. Elena's eyes snapped open. A man stood 10 feet away, partially shadowed by the hallway's dim lighting. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a black suit that whispered of Italian tailoring and serious money. He leaned against the opposite wall with casual ease, but there was nothing casual about the way he watched her. Absolute focus, total attention, the kind of observation that missed nothing. "I'm sorry," Elena said, straightening immediately into professional mode. "This area is restricted to staff." "I know." He stepped forward into the light, and Elena's breath caught. She'd never seen him before. She would have remembered. He was perhaps 40, with dark hair silvered at the temples and a face that seemed carved from stone, all sharp angles and hard planes saved from severity by a mouth that suggested he knew exactly how to devastate with a smile. His eyes were the color of aged whiskey, warm and cold simultaneously, reflecting intelligence that felt almost predatory in its intensity. But what struck Elena most wasn't his appearance, it was his stillness. In a world of men who commanded attention through volume and aggression, this man's power came from absolute control. He didn't move unnecessarily, didn't speak to fill silence, simply existed with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly who he was and what he could do. "You handled Hartwell well," he continued, his voice carrying a faint roughness that suggested whiskey and late nights. "Better than he deserved." Elena's professional smile felt brittle. "I should get back to the event." "Should you?" He tilted his head slightly, studying her with unsettling directness. "You're shaking. You've just had an unpleasant encounter with a member who will likely complain to management. Wouldn't it be wiser to take a moment, compose yourself, and return when you're certain you won't betray any emotion?" The analysis was accurate and irritating in equal measure. "Who are you?" Something flickered in those whiskey eyes. Amusement, perhaps, or approval. Someone who appreciates competence and boundaries, both of which you demonstrated admirably just now. That's not an answer. No, he agreed. It's not. They stood in silence for a moment, the distant sounds of the gala providing surreal background music. Elena knew she should walk away. This man, whoever he was, radiated danger in a way Gregory Hartwell never could. Gregory was a pest, annoying, entitled, ultimately harmless. This man was something else entirely. You're right, Elena said finally. I should compose myself before returning. Thank you for the reminder. She expected him to leave, to offer some polite dismissal and disappear back into the event. Instead, he remained perfectly still, watching her with that unnerving focus. Your name is Elena Moore, he said. Not a question, a statement. You've been lead event director here for 3 years. Before that, you worked at the Plaza. Before that, you put yourself through NYU while managing events for a catering company in Brooklyn. You're 29 years old. You live alone in a rent-controlled apartment in Chelsea. You have no family in New York, no significant romantic relationships, and no interest in pursuing either. Elena's blood ran cold. How do you know that? I make it my business to know about people who work in my establishment. The words registered slowly, their meaning crystallizing with horrifying clarity. Your establishment. The Meridian Club belongs to me, Ms. Moore, along with several other properties in Manhattan. I'm Victor Romano. Elena had heard the name, of course. Everyone who worked at the club had heard whispered references to the owner. A man so private he never attended events, never appeared in public, conducted all business through intermediaries. The staff called him the Ghost because no one had ever seen him. But the rumors went deeper, darker. Victor Romano's name appeared in breathless tabloid speculation about organized crime, about connections to families that controlled everything from shipping to construction to city politics. Nothing ever stuck. No charges ever filed, but the whispers persisted. This was a man who built his empire on fear and absolute control. And Elena had just told Gregory Hartwell she'd have him thrown out of a gala at Victor Romano's club. I apologize, Elena said quickly, her mind racing through damage control. My confrontation with Mr. Hartwell was inappropriate for the venue. I should have handled it more discreetly. Why? The single word stopped her cold. Excuse me? Victor pushed off the wall, moving toward her with fluid grace. He stopped just outside her personal space, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something dark and expensive, but not close enough to threaten. The restraint felt deliberate. Why should you have handled it more discreetly? His voice remained perfectly calm, perfectly level. Hartwell put his hands on you without permission, called you a demeaning name, and treated you as if your professional role made you available for his entertainment. You established a boundary and enforced consequences. Why should that have been done quietly? Elena stared at him, thrown completely off balance. Because discretion is part of my job. Because scenes upset guests. Because you've been taught that maintaining the comfort of wealthy men is more important than maintaining your own dignity? The question landed like a physical blow. Elena opened her mouth, closed it, had no answer that didn't sound hollow. Let me be very clear about something, Ms. Moore. Victor's eyes held hers with absolute intensity. I don't employ people who allow themselves to be disrespected. I don't maintain membership for men who treat my staff like property. Gregory Hartwell's behavior was unacceptable. Your response was proportional and professional. You have nothing to apologize for. You're not upset about the scene? I'm upset it was necessary. Something hard and dangerous flickered across his face. Hartwell's membership will be terminated tomorrow. He won't be returning to this club or any property I control. Elena felt the floor tilt slightly beneath her feet. That seems extreme. Does it? Victor moved closer, and this time Elena felt the full force of his presence, the barely restrained power, the absolute certainty. A man puts his hands on my event director, speaks to her like she exists for his amusement, creates a situation where she has to defend herself publicly because he lacks basic respect. And you think terminating his membership is extreme? He's a major donor. I don't need his money. The words carried utter conviction. What I need are staff members who understand their value, who refuse to be diminished, who draw lines and enforce them without apology. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. This close, Victor Romano was overwhelming, not through aggression, but through sheer intensity of presence. He looked at her like she mattered, like her boundaries mattered, like the principle of respect was worth more than Gregory Hartwell's donations. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. "I don't understand," Elena said quietly. "Why do you care?" "Because competence is rare, integrity is rarer, and women who possess both while refusing to compromise themselves are nearly extinct." Victor's voice dropped lower, more intimate. "You're valuable, Ms. Moore, more valuable than you know, and I protect what's valuable." Before Elena could respond, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, crisis in the kitchen, something about the main course timing. Reality crashed back with brutal force. "I have to go," she said. "The dinner service." "Of course." Victor stepped back immediately, returning her personal space. "Handle your crisis. We'll talk later." Elena nodded and hurried down the corridor, her mind spinning. She just had the strangest, most intense conversation of her professional life with a man who supposedly didn't exist, who just defended her more fiercely than anyone ever had, who looked at her like she cut off that thought before it could complete itself. The kitchen crisis turned out to be a miscommunication about timing, fixable with 3 quick phone calls and some reshuffling. Elena coordinated the solution with practiced efficiency, forcing her focus back to the work she understood. The gala needed her. Everything else could wait. But as she returned to the ballroom, Elena felt the weight of observation again. She found him immediately. Victor Romano stood near the far wall, partially obscured by the crowd, but his eyes tracked her movement with predatory precision. He wasn't hiding. He was watching openly, deliberately, making sure she knew she was seen. Elena's pulse kicked up as their gazes locked across the glittering room. For a moment, the hundreds of guests between them ceased to exist. There was only that whiskey-colored stare, that absolute focus, and the unsettling recognition that something fundamental had shifted. She looked away first, turning her attention to a server who needed direction. When she glanced back, Victor had vanished back into the shadows. But Elena could still feel him watching. The rest of the gala proceeded flawlessly. Dinner service went off without a hitch, the charity auction exceeded expected donations, and by 11 o'clock, guests were beginning their elegant departures, full of praise for the evening's success. Elena coordinated the shutdown procedures with mechanical efficiency, her mind only half engaged with the familiar tasks. She kept expecting Victor Romano to reappear. He didn't. By midnight, the ballroom stood empty except for cleanup crew. Elena did her final walkthrough, checking that everything was secure, that nothing valuable had been left behind. Her feet ached in her heels, and exhaustion was starting to creep in around the edges of the adrenaline that had sustained her. "Ms. Moore." Elena spun around to find Marcus Chen, the club's general manager, approaching with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Yes?" "Mr. Romano would like to see you in his office." Marcus's tone was carefully neutral, but his eyes held curiosity. In 3 years of working together, Elena had never been summoned to the owner's office, because the owner never used his office. Now, it came out more sharply than intended. "If you're available." Elena glanced at her watch. Nearly 12:30. Every professional instinct screamed that going to a private office with Victor Romano at this hour was dangerous, but refusing a direct summons from the owner would be worse. Of course, where? "Top floor, private elevator behind the concierge desk. It's already activated for you." Marcus departed before Elena could ask any of the dozen questions flooding her mind. She stood alone in the empty ballroom, crystal chandeliers now dimmed, and tried to organize her thoughts. Victor Romano wanted to see her. In private, after midnight. This was either about the Gregory Hartwell incident, some consequence she hadn't anticipated, or it was about something else entirely, something that made Elena's pulse race and her survival instincts flare warning. She could refuse, could claim exhaustion, promise to meet with him tomorrow during business hours when other staff would be present. But Elena had spent her entire adult life refusing to run from intimidating men. She'd stood her ground with Gregory Hartwell in front of 300 witnesses. She could certainly handle one more difficult conversation. Even if the man in question had eyes like a predator, and spoke about protection with unsettling possessiveness. Elena found the private elevator exactly where Marcus had indicated. The doors opened silently at her approach, revealing an interior of dark wood and brushed steel. She stepped inside, and the elevator began ascending without requiring any button press. The ride lasted perhaps 30 seconds, but felt longer. Elena used the time to check her reflection in the polished steel panels. Hair still neat despite the long evening, makeup holding, dress still presentable, professional armor still in place. The elevator opened directly into an office that stole Elena's breath. The space occupied the entire top floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of Manhattan's glittering skyline. Minimalist furniture spoke of wealth so extreme it didn't need to announce itself. A massive desk of dark wood, leather chairs that probably cost more than Elena's car, abstract art on the walls that looked original and significant. But what dominated the room was the sense of controlled power, of a space designed for someone who wielded authority without needing to display it. Victor Romano stood by the windows, silhouetted against the city lights. He'd removed his jacket, and his white shirt stretched across broad shoulders as he gazed out at the Manhattan night. He didn't turn as Elena entered, but his voice carried clearly across the space. "Thank you for coming, Ms. Moore. You didn't really leave me a choice." The words escaped before Elena could stop them. Too honest, too unfiltered. Now Victor did turn, and Elena saw that devastating almost smile. "I always leave people choices. Whether they recognize them is another matter." He gestured to one of the leather chairs facing his desk. Elena crossed the office, hyper-aware of her heels clicking against hardwood, of the way Victor's eyes tracked her movement. She sat with deliberate poise, back straight, ankles crossed, body language that projected confidence she didn't entirely feel. Victor settled into the chair behind his desk, leaning back with casual ease that somehow made him more imposing rather than less. The desk put physical distance between them, but Elena felt no safer for it. "I wanted to discuss the Gregory Hartwell incident," Victor began, "and its implications." Elena's stomach tightened. "I understand if there need to be consequences for how I handled—" "You misunderstand." Victor's voice cut through her attempted apology. "I'm not concerned about how you handled it. I'm concerned about what it reveals regarding this club's culture." Elena blinked. "I'm sorry." Hartwell felt comfortable putting his hands on my event director in a room full of witnesses because he didn't expect consequences. That suggests a systemic problem, one I intend to address. Victor pulled a file from his desk drawer, opening it with deliberate care. "I've reviewed every complaint filed by female staff members over the past 5 years. 47 incidents ranging from unwanted touching to explicit propositions. Of those 47, exactly 0 resulted in membership termination or meaningful consequences for the men involved." The number hit Elena like cold water. 47. She'd filed 3 of those complaints herself over the years, always written off as misunderstandings or acceptable behavior from valued members. "That ends now," Victor continued, "effective immediately. Any member who touches staff without permission, who makes sexually inappropriate comments, or who treats any employee as if their professional role makes them available for personal entertainment will have their membership terminated. No warnings, no second chances. Clear consequences for clear violations." Elena stared at him, trying to process the implications. "That policy will cost the club significant revenue." "I'm aware." Victor's expression remained implacable. "I consider it a worthwhile investment in maintaining the kind of establishment I want to run, one where my staff can do their jobs without being harassed. Most clubs don't. I don't care what most clubs do." The words carried absolute finality. "I care what happens in my establishment. And what happens in my establishment is that people like you, competent, professional, valuable, are treated with the respect they've earned." Elena felt something shift in her chest, some tight knot of tension she'd carried for years beginning to loosen. How many times had she accepted harassment as the price of working in luxury hospitality? How many times had she told herself that rich men's behavior was just something to endure? "Why?" The question escaped quietly. "Why do you care so much?" Victor was silent for a long moment, his whiskey eyes studying her with that unsettling intensity. When he spoke, his voice carried weight beyond the words. Because I was raised by a woman who worked 3 jobs to keep me fed and sheltered. Because I watched men treat her like she was nothing, invisible when they wanted service, visible when they wanted to demean her. Because I built everything I have on the principle that power without protection is worthless. He leaned forward slightly. And because when I see someone like you, someone who refuses to compromise her dignity, even when it would be easier, safer, more profitable, I recognize something worth protecting. The confession hung in the air between them, far more intimate than anything Gregory Hartwell had attempted. This wasn't seduction or manipulation. This was Victor Romano revealing a fundamental truth about who he was and what drove him. Elena didn't know how to respond, didn't trust her voice not to shake if she tried. I need to ask you something, Victor continued, and I need you to answer honestly, without concern for your job security. Can you do that? Elena nodded, not trusting words. Do you feel safe working here? The question was so direct, so unexpected, that Elena's carefully maintained composure cracked. She thought about 3 years of deflecting unwanted advances, of laughing off inappropriate comments, of making herself small and invisible to avoid the kind of attention that made her skin crawl. I feel as safe as any woman in my position, she said finally, which is to say, I'm careful. I set boundaries. I know which members to avoid when they've been drinking. I make sure I'm never alone with certain men. I'm good at my job and I'm good at protecting myself, but no, I don't always feel safe. Victor's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. That changes, starting now. The new harassment policy will be announced to the entire membership tomorrow. I want you to personally review the language before it goes out. Make sure it covers everything you've experienced and everything you've seen happen to other staff. You want my input? Elena couldn't hide her surprise. You're the one who knows what actually happens on the ground. I'm the one who can enforce consequences. Seems like an effective partnership. Partnership. The word choice felt deliberate, significant. Victor Romano didn't strike Elena as someone who chose words carelessly. There's one more thing, Victor said. He pulled out another document, sliding it across the desk. Your employment contract. Elena's heart sank. Here it came. The real reason for this midnight meeting. The consequences she'd been expecting. You're terminating me. I'm offering you a new position. Victor's tone remained maddeningly calm. Director of operations for all my Manhattan properties. Substantial salary increase, benefits package, and direct reporting to me rather than through general management. The role would involve overseeing event operations across 4 venues, implementing the new harassment policies, and ensuring consistent standards of excellence. Elena's mind went blank with shock. That's a massive promotion. You've earned it. 3 years of flawless execution here, plus your experience at the plaza, plus the fact that you're clearly capable of handling difficult situations with both competence and integrity. You're exactly what I need in that role. I don't understand. Elena shook her head, trying to make sense of this surreal conversation. You barely know me. We met for the first time tonight. I've been watching you for 6 months. The confession sent ice down Elena's spine. Watching me? Observing, Victor corrected, though the distinction felt meaningless. When I'm considering someone for a significant position, I don't rely on interviews or recommendations. I watch how they work when they think no one's paying attention, how they handle pressure, how they treat people with less power, how they respond when challenged. And what did you see? Someone who anticipates problems before they occur, someone who treats the cleaning staff with the same courtesy as the club members, someone who maintains standards even when it would be easier to compromise, someone who stands her ground when men like Hartwell cross lines. Victor's voice dropped lower, more intimate. Someone worth investing in. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she picked up the contract. The salary number made her breath catch, nearly triple her current compensation. The benefits package was extraordinary. The title carried real authority. It was everything she'd worked toward for years. It was also terrifying. This is a lot to consider, Elena said carefully. I'd need time to review. Of course, take the weekend. We can discuss details on Monday. Victor stood, moving around the desk with that fluid grace. But Elena? The use of her first name sent electricity down her spine. He'd called her Ms. Moore all evening. The shift to intimacy felt deliberate, significant. Yes? Victor stopped directly in front of her chair, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. Close enough that she could see the faint lines around his eyes, the shadow of stubble along his jaw, the absolute focus in his gaze. I want you to understand something, he said quietly. This offer has nothing to do with what happened tonight with Hartwell. I made the decision to promote you weeks ago. Tonight simply confirmed that my assessment was correct. He paused, and something shifted in his expression, something heated and possessive that made Elena's pulse spike. But while we're being honest with each other, I should tell you that my interest in you isn't purely professional. Elena's breath caught. Mr. Romano. Victor. The correction was gentle but firm. And before you panic, I'm not propositioning you, I'm stating a fact. I'm attracted to you, to your competence, your integrity, your refusal to be intimidated. But I don't mix business with personal involvement, and I never leverage power to pursue relationships. So here's what's going to happen. He reached down, taking her hand in his. The touch was warm, deliberate, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in a gesture that felt both possessive and reverent. You're going to take this contract home and review it carefully. You're going to make a decision based entirely on what's best for your career, with zero consideration for whether I find you attractive. If you accept the position, you'll work for me in a purely professional capacity, and I'll keep my personal interest to myself. If you decline, I'll respect that decision and ensure you suffer no negative consequences at the club. His voice dropped to something almost dangerous. But if, after you've made your professional decision, you decide you're interested in exploring what exists between us on personal terms, you'll let me know. And we'll proceed from there as equals, with no power dynamics or employment considerations involved. Clear? Elena's mind reeled. Victor Romano had just handed her a promotion, acknowledged his attraction, and then carefully, deliberately removed himself from any position to pressure her. He'd created a framework where she held all the power, where her career advancement was separate from any personal relationship, where she could choose both, either, or neither, without fear. It was the most respectful proposition she'd ever received. It was also the most terrifying because it meant every choice from this point forward would be entirely hers. Clear, Elena whispered. Victor smiled then, a real smile, devastating in its warmth, and lifted her hand to his lips. The kiss he pressed to her knuckles was barely there, a whisper of contact, but it burned like a brand. Good night, Elena. Take care going home. I'll have a car waiting downstairs for you. He released her hand and stepped back, the professional distance reasserting itself. Elena stood on shaking legs, clutching the contract like a lifeline. Good night, Victor. His eyes flared at her use of his first name, but he said nothing as she walked to the elevator. Elena felt his gaze on her back the entire way. Not threatening, not predatory, just absolutely present. The elevator doors closed and Elena sagged against the wall, her heart hammering. In the space of a few hours, her entire world had tilted on its axis. She'd confronted a harassing member, met the ghost owner who ran Manhattan's most exclusive club, been offered a promotion that would change her career trajectory, and been told by a man who radiated controlled danger that he wanted her, but would wait until she decided if she wanted him back. It was too much. It was overwhelming. It was also, Elena realized as the elevator descended toward ground level, exactly what she'd been waiting for without knowing it. Someone who saw her. Really saw her. Not just her competence or her appearance, but her fundamental worth. Someone who respected her boundaries even while making his interests clear. Someone powerful enough to protect, but controlled enough not to dominate. Victor Romano was dangerous in ways Gregory Hartwell could never imagine. But he was also offering Elena something she'd never had before, real partnership based on mutual respect. The question was whether she was brave enough to take it. The elevator opened to reveal the club's lobby, now empty except for Marcus Chen standing near the entrance. He smiled slightly as Elena approached. Your car is waiting, Ms. Moore. Black Mercedes by the curb. Thank you, Marcus. She stepped out into the cool Manhattan night, and sure enough, a sleek black Mercedes idled at the curb with a driver standing beside the rear door. He opened it as she approached, nodding respectfully. Elena slid into the leather interior, giving her address in Chelsea. As the car pulled into traffic, she looked back at the Meridian Club. Its elegant facade now dark except for security lights, its windows reflecting the city like mirrors. On the top floor, a single light still burned. Elena pressed her hand against the window glass, remembering the feel of Victor's lips against her knuckles, the intensity of his gaze, the careful way he'd framed his proposition to give her all the power. She'd spent her entire adult life being careful, being professional, maintaining boundaries and protecting herself from men who saw her as either invisible or available. Victor Romano saw her as neither. He saw her as someone worth promoting, worth protecting, worth waiting for. The question Elena would spend the weekend contemplating wasn't whether to accept the job. She'd be a fool to turn down that opportunity. The question was whether she had the courage to accept everything else Victor was offering. Partnership, protection, possibility. And beneath it all, the promise of something that made her pulse race and her careful control waver, the chance to be chosen by a man who understood the difference between possession and devotion. The Mercedes carried her through Manhattan's glittering streets toward her small Chelsea apartment, and Elena Moore allowed herself for the first time in years to wonder what it might feel like to let someone in. To choose to be claimed by a man who would never try to own her, to surrender to the most dangerous possibility of all, being truly, completely seen. The weekend stretched before Elena like uncharted territory. She'd taken the contract home Friday night and spent Saturday morning reading every clause, every provision, every carefully worded benefit. The legal language was clear, the terms generous, the opportunity legitimate. Victor Romano was offering her exactly what he'd promised, a career advancement based purely on merit. But the contract was only part of what occupied Elena's mind as she sat in her Chelsea apartment, coffee growing cold on the table beside her. She kept returning to those final moments in Victor's office, the way he'd looked at her, the deliberate care with which he'd separated his professional offer from his personal interest, the feel of his lips against her knuckles, barely there, but searing in its restraint. I'm attracted to your competence, your integrity, your refusal to be intimidated. Elena had been propositioned before. God knew she'd fielded enough unwanted advances to recognize manipulation when she saw it. But Victor's approach had been different. He hadn't used his power to pressure her. He'd deliberately neutralized it, creating a space where she could make choices without coercion. That kind of restraint from a man who clearly didn't need to restrain himself for anyone? That was more seductive than any smooth line could ever be. Elena's phone buzzed. A text from her former colleague at the plaza. Coffee tomorrow? Need your advice on a bridezilla situation. She smiled and typed back a confirmation, grateful for the distraction. But as she set the phone down, Elena's eyes caught on the contract again, and her mind drifted back to Victor. 6 months. He'd been watching her for 6 months, assessing her work, evaluating her character. The revelation should have felt invasive, creepy even. Instead, Elena found it oddly reassuring. Victor Romano didn't make impulsive decisions. He observed, analyzed, and then acted with absolute certainty, which meant his interest in her, both professional and personal, wasn't casual or fleeting. The thought sent heat through Elena's veins that had nothing to do with the coffee. By Sunday evening, she'd made her decision. The professional part was easy. She'd be a fool to turn down this opportunity. The personal part was more complicated, but Elena had spent enough years playing it safe to recognize that safety and satisfaction weren't the same thing. She drafted an email to Victor on her laptop, then deleted it. Too formal. She picked up her phone, then set it down. Too casual. Finally, Elena pulled out a piece of heavy cardstock from her desk drawer, left over from a wedding invitation she'd helped design, and wrote in her careful script, Victor, I accept the position. I'll be ready to discuss transition details Monday morning. As for the other matter you mentioned, I'd like to have dinner with you, somewhere we can talk without professional considerations. If you're still interested, Elena. She sealed it in an envelope, addressed it to Victor Romano at the Meridian Club, and walked the 6 blocks to drop it in a mailbox before she could second-guess herself. The die was cast. Monday morning arrived cold and bright. Elena dressed with extra care, a charcoal gray suit that spoke of authority without being severe, Her hair pulled back but softer than her usual chignon, minimal jewelry that suggested confidence. She looked like someone ready to step into a director-level position. She looked like someone who'd decided to stop playing it safe. Marcus Chen met her in the lobby of the Meridian Club with an expression caught between curiosity and respect. "Good morning, Ms. Moore. Mr. Romano asked me to escort you to the executive offices." "Of course." The private elevator carried them up, but this time Marcus accompanied her, using a key card to access a floor Elena hadn't visited before, one below Victor's penthouse office. The doors opened to reveal a sleek corridor with frosted glass walls and modern art that probably cost more than Elena's car. "Your office," Marcus said, gesturing to a corner space with windows overlooking Fifth Avenue. "Mr. Romano wanted you to have time to settle in before your meeting with him at 10. Elena stepped into the office and felt her breath catch. The space was beautiful, clean lines, natural light, furniture that balanced elegance with functionality. Her nameplate already sat on the desk. Elena Moore, Director of Operations. "The IT department set up your computer and email access this morning," Marcus continued. "HR has your benefits paperwork ready for signature, and Mr. Romano left this for you." He handed Elena a heavy cream envelope before departing with a slight smile. She waited until she was alone to open it. Inside was a handwritten note on Victor's personal stationery, heavy stock, his initials embossed at the top. "Elena, welcome to your new role. I look forward to working with you. As for your other question, I'll send a car for you Wednesday at 7. Dress comfortably. We're going somewhere that values substance over appearance. V." Elena traced the bold handwriting with her fingertip, a smile pulling at her lips. Not flowery or effusive, just direct, clear communication from a man who said what he meant and meant what he said. Wednesday. She had 2 days to prepare for whatever Victor Romano considered a proper first date. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. Elena spent the morning reviewing operational files for all 4 properties under her new purview. The Meridian Club was the flagship, but Victor's portfolio also included a boutique hotel in Soho, a private event space in the meatpacking district, and an exclusive restaurant near Central Park. Each had its own management team, its own culture, its own challenges. It was exactly the kind of complex, high-stakes work Elena had been craving. At precisely 10 o'clock, her desk phone rang. Marcus's voice came through with professional warmth. "Mr. Romano is ready to see you now." Elena took the private elevator up one more floor, her pulse quickening despite her best efforts to remain calm. This was a professional meeting. She had a new job to discuss, responsibilities to clarify, expectations to establish. The fact that the man she'd be working for had also invited her to dinner had nothing to do with this particular conversation. The elevator opened and Victor stood near the windows of his office, morning light turning him into a figure of sharp contrasts, dark suit against bright sky, hard edges softened by golden sun. He turned as she entered, and Elena saw something flash in his eyes before his expression settled into professional neutrality. "Elena, thank you for coming. Thank you for the opportunity." She crossed the office, shaking the hand he offered. His grip was firm, warm, lingering just a fraction longer than strictly professional before he released her. "Sit, please." Victor gestured to the same leather chairs as before, but this time he sat beside her rather than behind his desk. Equal positioning, partners, as he'd suggested. "I wanted to discuss your transition into the new role," he began, pulling out a tablet. "Marcus will handle day-to-day management at the Meridian Club for the next 2 weeks while you familiarize yourself with all 4 properties. After that, you'll need to hire an events coordinator here to replace yourself. I want your input on candidates." For the next hour, they worked through logistics with focused efficiency. Elena took notes, asked questions, offered suggestions that Victor considered with genuine attention. It felt natural, collaborative, 2 professionals building a framework for success. But beneath the surface, Elena felt the constant hum of awareness. The way Victor's shoulder occasionally brushed hers when he leaned over to show her something on the tablet. The rough timbre of his voice when he explained his vision for the hotel renovation. The way his eyes tracked her when she stood to examine the portfolio documents he'd spread across his desk. He wanted her. The knowledge pulsed between them like a living thing, restrained but undeniable. And Elena was surprised to discover she wanted him back. This controlled, dangerous man who looked at her like she was something precious that deserved protection. "There's one more thing we need to address," Victor said as their meeting wound down. He stood, moving to the bar cart near the windows and pouring 2 glasses of water. He handed one to Elena, his fingers brushing hers in the transfer. "The new harassment policy." Elena accepted the glass, grateful for something to do with her hands. "I reviewed the draft you sent. It's comprehensive." "But?" Victor's eyebrow lifted slightly. "I hear a qualification in your voice." "The policy is perfect on paper. The question is enforcement. How do you ensure managers actually implement it consistently across all properties?" "Good question." Victor settled into the chair beside her again, closer this time. "Which is why part of your new role involves oversight of implementation. Quarterly reviews, staff surveys, direct reporting to me on any incidents. I want you to be the person who ensures this policy has teeth." Elena met his gaze directly. "Some of the members won't like it. You'll lose revenue." "Let me be very clear about something." Victor's voice dropped lower, harder. "I built what I have through calculated risks and absolute principles. One of those principles is that people who work for me are protected from external threats and from the people who pay for services. Money is replaceable. Integrity isn't. If members don't like that, they can find somewhere else to spend their money." The conviction in his words sent warmth through Elena's chest. How many employers actually meant that? How many would sacrifice profit for principle? "I understand," she said quietly, "and I'll make sure the policy is enforced." "I know you will." Victor smiled slightly. "That's why I chose you." The word chose hung between them, layered with meaning beyond the professional. Victor had chosen her for this job, yes, but he'd also chosen her for something else. Something that would begin Wednesday night, somewhere that valued substance over appearance. Elena set down her water glass with deliberate care. "Was there anything else you needed to discuss regarding the position?" "No. I think we've covered everything professionally." Victor's eyes held hers, golden and intent. "Unless you have questions?" "Just one." Elena kept her voice steady despite her racing pulse. "Wednesday night. Should I know anything in advance?" Something hot and possessive flickered across Victor's face before he controlled it. "Just that I don't do things halfway. When I take you to dinner, Elena, it won't be about impressing you with expensive restaurants or showing off wealth. It'll be about getting to know who you are when the professional masks come off. Fair warning, I ask direct questions and I expect honest answers." "I'm not afraid of honesty." "Good." Victor stood, offering his hand to help her up. When Elena took it, he drew her closer, not inappropriately, but enough that she could smell his cologne, feel the heat of his body. "Because I'm not interested in who you think I want you to be. I'm interested in who you actually are." Elena's breath caught. "And if you don't like what you find?" "Then we'll have had an honest conversation and we'll continue working together professionally with mutual respect." His thumb brushed across her knuckles. That same gesture from Friday night, deliberate and claiming. "But I don't think that's going to be a problem." The confidence in his voice should have been arrogant. Instead, it felt like certainty, like Victor Romano had already seen enough of her to know exactly what he was choosing. "Wednesday at 7, Elena said softly. "Wednesday at 7, Victor confirmed. He released her hand slowly, reluctantly. "I'll see you tomorrow for the property tour." Elena nodded and turned toward the elevator, feeling his gaze on her back like a physical touch. As the doors closed between them, she saw him standing by the windows, hands in his pockets, watching her with an expression of such focused intensity that her knees went weak. This was really happening. She was really doing this, stepping into a new career, stepping toward a man who represented everything she'd carefully avoided for years. Power, danger, the kind of passionate intensity that could consume if she wasn't careful. But Elena was tired of being careful, tired of making herself small and safe, tired of deflecting and protecting and maintaining boundaries with men who didn't deserve her consideration. Victor Romano deserved her consideration. He'd earned it through respect, restraint, and the rare quality of seeing her as a whole person rather than a collection of useful parts. The question was whether Elena was brave enough to let him keep looking. The next 2 days blurred together in productive chaos. Elena toured all 4 properties, met with management teams, reviewed operational procedures, and began identifying areas for improvement. The work was challenging and energizing, exactly the kind of complex problem-solving she craved. But beneath the professional focus, anticipation built like gathering storm clouds. Wednesday morning, Elena stood in her apartment surrounded by rejected outfit options. Victor had said to dress comfortably, that they were going somewhere that valued substance over appearance. But what did that mean exactly? Jeans seemed too casual for a first date with Victor Romano. The dress she'd worn to the gala felt too formal. Finally, Elena settled on dark jeans, a cream silk blouse, and a tailored leather jacket, polished but approachable, confident without trying too hard. She left her hair down in loose waves and kept her makeup natural. The woman who looked back from the mirror was recognizably herself, just slightly elevated. Perfect. At precisely 7 o'clock, her building's buzzer sounded. Elena grabbed her purse and headed downstairs, her heart hammering against her ribs. The same black Mercedes from Friday night idled at the curb, but this time Victor stood beside it, leaning against the door with casual elegance. He'd traded his usual suit for dark jeans and a black sweater that emphasized his broad shoulders, looking somehow more dangerous in casual clothes than he did in tailored business attire. Their eyes met, and Elena watched heat flare in his gaze as he took in her appearance. Elena. He straightened, moving toward her with that fluid grace. You look beautiful. Thank you. She accepted the hand he offered, feeling the now familiar warmth of his touch. So do you. Victor's smile was devastating. I clean up all right when I try. He opened the car door for her, and Elena slid into the leather interior. Victor followed, settling beside her close enough that their shoulders touched as the driver pulled into traffic. Where are we going? Elena asked. Brooklyn. There's a small Italian restaurant in Bensonhurst that's been there for 60 years. Family-owned, no reservations, best food you'll ever eat. Victor's voice carried warmth she hadn't heard before. Affection, nostalgia. It's where my mother used to take me when we could afford it, where I learned that real wealth has nothing to do with money. The confession was unexpectedly intimate, revealing a side of Victor Romano that the rumors and reputation never touched. Elena turned to look at him, seeing past the controlled exterior to something more vulnerable beneath. Your mother, she said carefully. You mentioned she worked 3 jobs. Maria Romano came to New York from Sicily with nothing but determination and a work ethic that put everyone else to shame. Victor's jaw tightened slightly. She died 6 years ago. Heart attack. She was only 58. I'm sorry. She got to see me successful first, got to stop working herself to exhaustion. I bought her a house in Westchester, made sure she had everything she needed. His voice roughened, but she never stopped being the woman who cleaned hotel rooms and served drinks and did laundry for people who treated her like she was invisible. Elena's hand found his, fingers threading together. She raised someone who makes sure his staff never feel invisible. Victor looked down at their joined hands, then up at her face with an expression that made Elena's breath catch. She would have liked you. She valued competence and integrity above everything else. Then we would have understood each other. They sat in comfortable silence as the Mercedes crossed the Brooklyn Bridge, Manhattan's glittering skyline falling away behind them. Elena watched Victor's profile in the passing streetlights, the sharp line of his jaw, the slight tension around his eyes that suggested old grief carefully controlled. This was who he was beneath the reputation. A son who'd loved his mother, a man who remembered his roots, someone who'd built an empire but never forgotten what powerlessness felt like. The restaurant Victor brought her to was tiny, maybe 12 tables crowded into a space that smelled of garlic, tomatoes, and fresh bread. Red checkered tablecloths, wine bottles lining the walls, an old woman at the hostess stand who lit up when she saw Victor. Vittorio! She came around the stand to embrace him, barely reaching his shoulder. Troppo tempo, figlio mio. Mi dispiace, Nonna Rosa. Victor returned the embrace with obvious affection before switching to English. I brought someone special. Elena, this is Rosa DeMarco. She's known me since I was 8 years old and used to sweep floors here for spare change. Rosa turned her sharp eyes on Elena, assessing with the frankness of someone who'd seen everything and suffered no fools. Special, he says. Let me look at you, Kara. Elena submitted to the scrutiny, feeling suddenly like she was meeting family rather than a restaurant owner. Bella, Rosa pronounced finally. Y intelligente. She looked at Victor with approval. This one has a brain. Much better than the last one you brought here. There was no last one, Nona, Victor said dryly. You're thinking of my cousin Tony. Bah, you're all the same to me. But Rosa's eyes twinkled as she led them to a corner table, somehow more private than the rest. I bring you the good wine. And the ossobuco. Vittorio loves the ossobuco. She bustled away before either of them could respond. Victor pulled out Elena's chair with old-fashioned courtesy before settling across from her. Sorry, he said. Rosa has been trying to marry me off for years. She thinks I work too much. Do you? Elena accepted the wine Rosa poured with practiced efficiency, deep red, probably expensive despite the restaurant's humble appearance. Probably. Victor lifted his glass in a small toast. To honest conversations. To honest conversations, Elena echoed, clinking her glass against his. The wine was excellent, rich and complex, warming all the way down. Elena set her glass aside and met Victor's gaze directly. So, you wanted to know who I am when the professional masks come off? I do. Victor leaned back, utterly focused. Tell me about your family, where you're from. What made you who you are? Elena had deflected questions like this for years, keeping her history private and protected. But something about Victor's direct attention, the intimacy of this tiny restaurant, the way he'd shared his own vulnerability made her want to match it. I grew up in Ohio, small town outside Cleveland. My father left when I was 6, just disappeared one day. No explanation, no contact since. The old wound barely hurt anymore, worn smooth by time. My mother did her best, but she struggled with depression. I learned early that if I wanted stability, I had to create it myself. Victor's expression didn't change, but something softened in his eyes. So you became competent because incompetence meant chaos. Exactly. Elena felt seen in a way that made her chest tight. I put myself through college working 3 jobs, moved to New York the day after graduation with $800 and a desperate need to prove I could build something stable. I've been building ever since. And relationships? The question was gentle but direct. Elena took another sip of wine, gathering her thoughts. I've had a few. Nothing serious. I think I was always so focused on building my career, creating security, that I never really let anyone close enough to matter. She met his eyes. And honestly, most men either wanted me to be less competent, less ambitious, less focused, or they wanted to use what I was building for themselves. I got tired of both. So you stayed alone. I stayed safe, Elena corrected. There's a difference. Is there? Victor leaned forward, his gaze intense. Or is safety just another word for lonely? The question hit harder than Elena expected. She opened her mouth to deflect, then remembered they toasted to honest conversations. Sometimes, she admitted quietly, sometimes safety feels a lot like lonely. Victor reached across the table, taking her hand in his. His thumb traced patterns on her palm, soothing, possessive, claiming without demanding. I understand that. I've built everything I have through control and distance. Let very few people close. Kept relationships transactional because emotional investment felt like vulnerability I couldn't afford. His voice dropped lower. But there's a difference between strategic distance and isolating yourself because you're afraid of what might happen if you let someone matter. Which one are you? I was the first. His eyes held hers. Until I met someone who made me want to be the second. Elena's breath caught. Victor, let me finish. He squeezed her hand gently. I told you I've been watching you for 6 months. What I didn't tell you is why I kept watching. It wasn't just your competence, though that's impressive. It wasn't just your integrity, though that's rare. It was the way you moved through the world, controlled, careful, protected. The way I moved through the world. And I recognized it, Elena. That careful distance, that refusal to be vulnerable because vulnerability means risk. And that made you interested in me? That made me understand you. Victor's voice carried conviction that resonated in Elena's bones. But what made me interested was watching you choose to be vulnerable anyway. When you stood up to Hartwell in front of 300 people, you risked everything you'd built for the sake of principle. That's not careful or controlled. That's brave. Elena's eyes burned slightly. No one had ever called her brave before. Competent, professional, impressive, but never brave. "I don't feel brave," she whispered. "I feel terrified most of the time." "That's what makes it brave." Victor lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm that felt like a promise. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to act despite it. Rosa appeared then with plates of food that smelled incredible. Ossobuco in rich sauce, fresh pasta, vegetables that had clearly been picked that day. She fussed over their table, refilling wine, adjusting silverware, all while providing commentary in rapid Italian that made Victor smile. When she finally left them alone, Elena looked at the feast spread before them and laughed. "She's feeding us like we're family." To Rosa, everyone is family. It's one of the things I love about this place. Victor served Elena before serving himself, the gesture casually protective. "When I was building my first business, barely scraping by, I'd come here once a month. Rosa would feed me whether I could pay or not. Said I was too skinny and needed a grandmother's cooking." "What was your first business?" "Security consulting. I had contacts from—" He paused, considering his words. "From people I grew up around, people who valued loyalty and discretion. I built a reputation providing both, and the business grew from there." Elena heard what he wasn't saying, the careful phrasing, the deliberate vagueness about those early contacts. This was the part of Victor Romano's history where the rumors lived, the suggestions of organized crime connections, of wealth built on foundations most people didn't examine too closely. She should probably be concerned. Should ask direct questions about exactly how he'd built his empire, what moral compromises he'd made, whether the man across from her had done things that would horrify her if she knew the details. But Elena found she didn't want to know. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. Because what mattered wasn't who Victor had been when he was desperate and building from nothing. What mattered was who he was now. A man who protected his employees, who honored his mother's memory, who brought her to a tiny Brooklyn restaurant instead of someplace designed to impress. A man who saw her completely and still chose her anyway. "Tell me about your businesses now," Elena said, deliberately moving forward rather than backward. "What you're building, where you want to go." Victor's expression shifted to something more animated as he described his plans for the hotel renovation, his vision for expanding into hospitality consulting, his careful strategy for building legitimate enterprises that would outlast him. He talked about creating something sustainable, something clean, something his mother would have been proud of. And Elena listened, asked questions, offered insights from her own experience. The conversation flowed easily, naturally, two professionals who respected each other's expertise finding common ground. But beneath the professional discussion, Elena felt the constant pull of attraction. The way Victor's eyes tracked her movements, the careful way he touched her hand when making a point, the rough timbre of his voice when he talked about things he cared about. This was what intimacy felt like, Elena realized. Not grand gestures or expensive gifts, just honest conversation with someone who saw you and liked what they saw. Someone who made you want to be brave enough to let them keep looking. By the time they finished dinner, Elena felt pleasantly warm from wine and full from food, and slightly intoxicated from 3 hours of Victor's undivided attention. Rosa hugged them both goodbye, whispering something in Italian to Victor that made him smile and shake his head. The drive back to Manhattan felt shorter than the drive out. Victor kept Elena's hand in his, their fingers intertwined, thumb tracing absent patterns that sent heat through her entire body. They didn't talk much, didn't need to. The silence between them held comfortable weight, like a conversation they didn't need words for. When the Mercedes pulled up outside Elena's building, Victor walked her to the door despite the late hour. They stood under the streetlight face to face, and Elena felt the moment stretch with possibility. "Thank you for tonight," she said softly. "For being honest, for Rosa and the Ossobuco and everything. Thank you for giving me a chance." Victor reached up, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear with heartbreaking gentleness. "For being brave enough to let me get to know you." So what happens now? Now you tell me if you want to do this again, if you want to keep exploring what this is between us. His hand cupped her jaw, thumb brushing across her cheekbone. But Elena, if we do this, I need you to understand something. What? I don't do casual. I don't do temporary. When I choose someone, I'm all in. Protective, possessive, committed. That intensity can be overwhelming. His eyes held hers with absolute seriousness. So before you say yes to a second date, make sure you're ready for what you're choosing. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it, the moment of real choice. She could step back, keep things professional, protect herself from the intensity Victor was offering, or she could step forward into something that might consume her if she wasn't careful. She thought about 6 months of Victor watching her from the shadows, recognizing something worth pursuing, about him defending her against Hartwell without being asked, about the careful way he'd separated their professional relationship from their personal one so she could choose freely, about Rosa's ossobuco and stories of his mother and the vulnerability beneath his controlled exterior. Elena stepped closer, rising on her toes to press a kiss to Victor's cheek, gentle, chaste, but deliberate. I want a second date, she whispered against his skin. I want to be brave enough for whatever this is. Victor's arms came around her, holding her close but carefully, his cheek pressed to her hair. Then we'll be brave together. They stood like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other under the streetlight, before Victor finally released her with obvious reluctance. Good night, Elena. Good night, Victor. She watched him return to the Mercedes, watched the car pull away into Manhattan traffic, then turned and climbed the stairs to her apartment with her heart full and her mind racing. She'd just chosen to let Victor Romano into her life, to explore whatever this intense, consuming thing between them might become, to be brave enough to risk the careful stability she'd spent years building for the possibility of something more. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was, Elena suspected, as she got ready for bed with a smile she couldn't suppress, exactly what she'd been waiting for without knowing it. The chance to be truly, completely chosen by someone who understood that choosing her meant cherishing her strength, not trying to diminish it. And if Victor Romano's intensity consumed her, well, Elena was beginning to think that might not be the worst way to burn. The second date happened 3 days later, a Sunday afternoon that Victor spent showing Elena parts of Manhattan she'd never seen despite living there for 7 years. Not the tourist destinations or luxury shopping districts, but the hidden corners he'd discovered while building his empire. A bookstore in the East Village that stayed open until 3 in the morning. A rooftop garden in Chinatown maintained by elderly residents who grew vegetables and herbs from their home countries. A jazz club in Harlem where musicians played for love rather than money. You're showing me your New York, Elena said as they walked through Central Park at sunset, their fingers intertwined, the one most people never see. I'm showing you the parts that matter. Victor pulled her closer as a jogger passed. The parts that remind me why I fought so hard to stay here when I had nothing. Elena leaned into his warmth, feeling the solid strength of him against her side. 3 dates in 2 weeks, and already Victor's presence felt necessary rather than novel. The way he listened when she talked about work challenges. The careful questions he asked about her mother, her childhood. The small vulnerabilities she'd spent years protecting. The possessive way his hand found the small of her back when they walked through crowded spaces, claiming without constraining. It was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. By their 5th date, Elena stopped pretending this was casual exploration. Victor had made his intentions clear from the beginning. He wanted something permanent, something consuming. And Elena was discovering she wanted the same thing, even if the intensity of that desire frightened her. They were having dinner at Victor's penthouse, a space Elena had only seen through windows during her first visit. Up close, it revealed more of who he was beneath the carefully controlled exterior. Books lined one wall, an eclectic mix of philosophy, history, and fiction that suggested genuine intellectual curiosity. A single photograph sat on the mantel, Victor with an older woman who had his eyes and a smile that radiated warmth despite obvious exhaustion. His mother, Elena realized, her chest tightening. She would have liked you, Victor said, following Elena's gaze. Would have appreciated that you don't need me to take care of you, but let me anyway. Elena turned to face him, wine glass cradled in her hands. Is that what you do? Take care of people? The people who matter to me, yes. Victor's expression was utterly serious. It's how I show love, Elena. Protection, provision. Making sure the people I care about never have to fight alone. The word love landed between them like a grenade, unexpected and powerful. They'd been seeing each other for 3 weeks. Most people would call that too soon for declarations. But Victor Romano didn't operate like most people. When he knew what he wanted, he claimed it. Victor, Elena's voice came out shakier than intended. I'm not asking you to say it back. He crossed the space between them with that fluid grace, taking her wine glass and setting it aside. His hands framed her face with devastating gentleness. I'm telling you where I am. I'm in love with you, Elena. With your competence and your courage and the way you refuse to make yourself smaller even when it would be easier. I'm all in, and I need you to know that before we go any further. Elena's breath caught. We've only known each other 3 weeks. I've known who you are for 6 months. I've been falling in love with you the entire time. I just didn't have access to you until you slapped Hartwell's hand away and gave me an excuse to finally introduce myself. Victor's thumb brushed across her cheekbone. But if you need more time, I don't. The words escaped before Elena could stop them, raw and honest. I don't need more time because I'm already there too. I'm terrified and overwhelmed and completely out of my depth, but I'm in love with you. Victor's eyes blazed with triumph and possession before his mouth crashed against hers. The kiss was nothing like the careful restraint he'd shown before. This was claiming, consuming, the full force of his controlled intensity finally unleashed. Elena gasped against his lips, and Victor took immediate advantage, deepening the kiss with devastating thoroughness. His hand slid into her hair, angling her head for better access while Elena's fingers clutched at his shoulders, desperate for anchor points in the storm of sensation. This was what she'd been afraid of, this overwhelming passion that made her careful control irrelevant. But instead of feeling consumed, Elena felt freed, like she could finally stop protecting herself because Victor would protect her instead. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Victor pressed his forehead to hers. Stay tonight. It wasn't really a question, more like an inevitability they'd been building toward since that first moment in the service corridor. Elena nodded, beyond words, and let Victor lead her to his bedroom. What happened next was intense, overwhelming, and absolutely perfect. Victor made love to her like she was something precious that deserved worship, his control slipping just enough to show the depth of feeling beneath. And Elena, who'd spent years maintaining careful boundaries, surrendered completely to the man who'd proven he'd never take more than she offered. Afterward, wrapped in Egyptian cotton sheets with Victor's arm heavy across her waist, Elena felt the last of her careful defenses crumble. This was what she'd been missing, not just physical intimacy, but emotional connection, the ability to be vulnerable with someone strong enough to handle her strength. What are you thinking? Victor's voice rumbled against her shoulder, rough with satisfaction. That I should probably be more scared than I am. Elena traced patterns on his forearm, that this happened fast and intensely, and I'm completely out of control. And? His arm tightened possessively. And I don't care. She turned in his arms to face him. For the first time in my life, I don't care about being careful or protected or in control. I just care about this. About us. Victor's smile was devastating. Good. Because I'm never letting you go, Elena Moore. You're mine now, and I protect what's mine. The declaration should have felt suffocating. Instead, it felt like safety. Elena fell asleep in Victor's arms that night and woke to sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows and the smell of coffee. She found Victor in the kitchen, barefoot and shirtless in pajama pants, making breakfast with casual competence. You cook, Elena said, leaning against the doorframe to watch. Rosa taught me, said no man should depend on others for basic survival. He glanced over his shoulder, his eyes heating as he took in her appearance. Wearing his shirt, hair sleep mussed, thoroughly claimed. Coffee's fresh, eggs will be ready in 5 minutes. They ate breakfast on his balcony overlooking Central Park, the September morning still warm enough to be comfortable. Victor read the financial section while Elena checked her phone for any urgent work issues, and the domesticity of it struck her with unexpected force. This was what partnership looked like. Not grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but quiet Sunday mornings in shared space and comfortable silence. "I need to tell you something," Victor said, setting down his newspaper. His expression had shifted to something more serious, about my family, about who they are, and what that means for us. Elena's stomach tightened. This was the conversation they'd been avoiding, the one about Victor's past, his connections, the rumors that swirled around his name. "Okay," she said carefully. "My father was connected. Organized crime. The real thing, not Hollywood glamorization. He died when I was 12, killed by a rival family." Victor's voice remained level, but Elena heard the old pain beneath. "My mother moved us away, tried to give me a different life. But some of those connections remained. When I started my business, I used them, took money from people who expected loyalty in return. And now? Now I'm legitimate. Every business I own operates legally, pays taxes, follows regulations. But some of my investors have histories that wouldn't survive close scrutiny. Some of the people I call when I need problems solved have methods that aren't exactly legal." He met her eyes directly. "I'm not that world anymore, Elena, but I'm not completely separate from it either. And being with me means accepting that gray area." Elena processed this carefully. She'd suspected as much. The whispers about Victor Romano didn't come from nowhere. But hearing him confirm it, acknowledge the moral complexity of his past and present, required her to make a real choice. "Are you still involved in anything illegal?" she asked bluntly. "No, everything I do now is clean." "Do you hurt people? Intimidate them? Use violence to solve problems?" "I protect people I care about. Sometimes that requires intimidation. I've never killed anyone, if that's what you're asking, but I've definitely scared people who needed scaring." His jaw tightened. "I'm not a good man by most standards, Elena. I'm controlled and strategic and absolutely ruthless when something I value is threatened. Like when you terminated Hartwell's membership. Exactly like that." Victor leaned forward, his intensity focused entirely on her. "I need you to understand what you're choosing. Being with me means sometimes watching me handle situations in ways that might make you uncomfortable. It means people will make assumptions about you, about us. It means accepting that I have a past I'm not proud of, but I won't apologize for because it made me who I am." Elena was quiet for a long moment, turning over his words. This was her exit if she wanted it. The moment where she could step back, reclaim her careful stability, protect herself from the complications of loving a man with Victor's history. But when Elena looked at Victor, really looked at him, she didn't see a criminal or a threat. She saw someone who'd fought his way out of poverty through whatever means available. Someone who protected his mother and honored her memory. Someone who'd built legitimate businesses and created jobs and treated his employees with dignity. Someone who'd chosen her and loved her with an intensity that most people never experienced. "I'm not interested in who you used to be," Elena said finally. "I'm interested in who you are now. And who you are now is someone who makes me feel safe, valued, and loved. Someone who respects my strength instead of trying to diminish it. Someone I trust completely, even knowing about the gray areas." Victor's expression shifted to something raw and vulnerable. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." Elena reached across the table to take his hand. "But I need you to promise me something. Anything. If you're ever going to do something that might put me in legal jeopardy or moral compromise, you tell me first. Give me the choice to be involved or step back. Don't protect me by keeping me in the dark." "I can do that." Victor lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles with that gesture she'd come to recognize as his particular form of devotion. "You deserve honesty, even when it's uncomfortable." "Then we're good." Elena smiled, feeling lighter despite the weight of what they'd discussed. "Your past is your past. Our future is what matters." The relief that washed across Victor's face told Elena how much he'd been carrying, the fear that his history would drive her away, that she'd demand he be someone he wasn't. But Elena had learned long ago that people were complex, that moral absolutes rarely survived contact with reality. that the man someone became mattered more than who they'd been when they were desperate. They spent the rest of Sunday wrapped up in each other, making love, talking about everything and nothing, existing in the bubble of new love that made the outside world feel distant and unimportant. By the time Victor's driver took Elena home that evening, she felt fundamentally changed. No longer alone by choice, but partnered with someone who saw her completely and loved her anyway. Monday morning brought reality crashing back. Elena arrived at her office to find Marcus waiting with an expression that meant problems. "We have a situation," he said, without preamble. Gregory Hartwell filed a complaint with the club's board. He's claiming his membership termination was retaliatory and inappropriate, and he's demanding reinstatement plus a formal apology from you. Elena's blood ran cold. The board is considering this? They're meeting tomorrow to discuss it. Hartwell's brought 2 other members as character witnesses, and he's threatening legal action if his membership isn't reinstated. Marcus looked uncomfortable. "I thought you should know before the meeting." "Does Victor know?" "I informed him this morning. He said to tell you not to worry, that he'll handle it." Marcus paused. "But between us, Ms. Moore, some board members are concerned about the precedent. Hartwell's a significant donor, and losing him means losing funding for several charitable initiatives." Elena nodded, her mind already racing through scenarios. This was exactly what she'd feared when she confronted Hartwell, that standing up for herself would have professional consequences, that men like him could weaponize the systems designed to protect them. "Thank you for the warning, Marcus. I'll prepare a statement for the board meeting." She spent the rest of Monday documenting everything that had happened the night of the gala. Hartwell's unwanted touch, his demeaning language, the public nature of the confrontation. By evening, she had a clear professional account that left no room for misinterpretation. Victor called as she was leaving the office. "Have dinner with me. I need to prepare for tomorrow's board meeting, which is exactly why you should have dinner with me. You need to eat, and I need to see you." His voice softened. "Please, Elena, let me take care of you tonight." Elena felt the tension in her shoulders ease slightly. "Okay, your place or mine?" "Mine. I'll send the car in 30 minutes. By the time Elena arrived at Victor's penthouse, he had dinner laid out, takeout from Rose's restaurant because apparently Victor had called ahead. The familiar smell of marinara and fresh bread made Elena's eyes prick with emotion. This man knew exactly what she needed, comfort food in his presence, nothing fancy or complicated. "Tell me about the board meeting," Victor said once they were settled with food and wine. Elena walked him through Hartwell's complaint, the board's concerns, her prepared statement. Victor listened with absolute focus, asking occasional clarifying questions, but mostly letting her process out loud. "You're worried they'll side with him," he observed. "He's a significant donor. I'm replaceable staff who caused a scene." Elena pushed pasta around her plate. "From a business perspective, reinstating him makes sense. From a business perspective, keeping you makes more sense." Victor's voice carried steel beneath the calm. "You're brilliant at your job. You've implemented harassment policies that are already improving staff morale, and you stood up for yourself when you were disrespected. Any board that would sacrifice you to appease Hartwell is a board that doesn't understand value." "But, Elena." Victor reached across to still her restless hands. "I told you I protect what's mine. That includes protecting you from wealthy men who think their money makes them untouchable. Trust me to handle this." "How are you going to handle it?" "By reminding the board that I own controlling interest in the club, and my decision on Hartwell's membership is final." His expression hardened, and by making it very clear that any board member who votes to reinstate him will be finding new positions elsewhere. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. This was the ruthlessness Victor had warned her about. The willingness to use power absolutely when something he valued was threatened. Part of her wanted to argue that she could fight her own battles, but another part, the part that was tired of fighting alone, felt profound relief that someone was finally in her corner with the power to actually protect her. "That seems extreme," she said carefully. "Does it?" Victor's eyes blazed. "A man sexually harassed my employee and my partner. When called on it, he tried to use wealth and influence to avoid consequences. Now he's attempting to weaponize the board against you, and you think ensuring he faces permanent repercussions is extreme?" Put that way, Elena had to admit Victor had a point. What if the board resigns en masse rather than accepting your ultimatum? Then I'll find new board members who understand that integrity isn't negotiable. Victor pulled her into his lap, his arms coming around her with possessive certainty. You're mine, Elena. That means you get the full force of my protection, my resources, my absolute commitment to making sure people who hurt you regret it. If that makes me ruthless, I'll accept that label gladly. Elena buried her face in Victor's neck, breathing in his familiar scent. This was what it meant to be loved by Victor Romano. Total protection, absolute loyalty, the certainty that he would burn down anyone who threatened her. It should feel suffocating, but instead it felt like freedom. Freedom to stop fighting every battle alone. Freedom to let someone else be strong when she was tired of being strong. Thank you, she whispered against his skin. Always. He pressed a kiss to her temple. Now finish your dinner, then come to bed. You need rest before tomorrow's meeting. The board meeting took place at 10 o'clock Tuesday morning in the conference room adjacent to Victor's office. Elena arrived 15 minutes early, her statement printed and organized, her professional armor firmly in place. She'd dressed with care, a navy suit that spoke of authority, her hair pulled back severely, minimal jewelry. She looked like someone who couldn't be intimidated, even if her heart hammered against her ribs. Marcus met her outside the conference room with an encouraging smile. Mr. Romano is already inside with the board. He asked me to bring you in at precisely 10. At exactly 10 o'clock, Marcus opened the conference room door. The scene that greeted Elena was not what she expected. 6 board members sat around the massive table, all men in expensive suits, all looking distinctly uncomfortable. Victor sat at the head of the table in his shirt sleeves, relaxed and utterly in control. And Gregory Hartwell sat at the far end, his face red with barely suppressed fury. "Ms. Moore," Victor said, his voice carrying that particular edge that meant he was done playing. "Thank you for joining us. Please, sit." He gestured to the chair beside his, the power position where board members would have to look at her to address Victor. Elena sat with deliberate poise, meeting Gregory Hartwell's glare with cool indifference. "Gentlemen," Victor continued, "we're here to address Mr. Hartwell's complaint regarding his membership termination. I've reviewed the complaint, the security footage from the gala, and Ms. Moore's account of events. Before we proceed, I want to be very clear about something." He leaned forward, and every man in the room seemed to shrink slightly. "The Meridian Club operates under policies I establish. One of those policies, effective the morning after the gala, is zero tolerance for harassment of staff. Mr. Hartwell violated that policy when he put his hands on Miss Moore without permission and called her a demeaning name. His membership was terminated as a direct consequence of his actions. That decision is final and non-negotiable." "With all due respect, Mr. Romano," one of the board members ventured, "the policy wasn't in place when the incident occurred. Retroactive punishment seems—" "The policy formalized what should have been common decency," Victor cut him off. "Are you suggesting that before the official policy existed, it was acceptable for members to sexually harass my staff?" The board member paled. "Of course not, but then we're in agreement that Hartwell's behavior warranted consequences, regardless of whether the policy was formally documented." Victor's voice was perfectly calm, perfectly lethal. "The question before this board isn't whether Hartwell deserves reinstatement. It's whether you understand that working with me means accepting my standards for how people are treated in my establishments." Gregory Hartwell finally spoke, his voice shaking with rage. "This is ridiculous. I barely touched the girl." "Ms. Moore," Elena corrected coldly. "And you put your hand on my wrist, invaded my personal space, and called me baby after I'd given you no indication such familiarity was welcome. That's assault, Mr. Hartwell, regardless of how you minimize it." "I was being friendly." "You were being inappropriate." Victor's voice cracked like a whip. "And your attempt to characterize sexual harassment as friendliness tells me everything I need to know about why you're here. You don't think you did anything wrong. You think your money and status entitle you to treat people however you want without consequences. I've donated hundreds of thousands to this club, and I've built an empire worth billions." Victor stood, and the sheer presence of him filled the room. "Your donations don't buy you the right to harass my staff. They don't buy you influence over my decisions. And they certainly don't buy you reinstatement after you've demonstrated complete lack of respect for the people who work here. He looked around the table at each board member in turn. I'm going to make this very simple. Any member of this board who votes to reinstate Hartwell's membership will tender their resignation by end of business today. I will not have people in leadership positions who value donor money over staff dignity. Is that clear? The silence that followed was absolute. Elena watched the board members exchange glances, saw the moment they collectively decided that crossing Victor Romano was not worth whatever loyalty they might have felt toward Hartwell. Perfectly clear, the board chairman said finally. I move that we uphold Mr. Romano's decision to terminate Mr. Hartwell's membership permanently. All in favor? 6 hands rose simultaneously. The decision is unanimous, the chairman said with obvious relief. Mr. Hartwell, your appeal is denied. Please gather your personal effects from your locker and vacate the premises within 24 hours. Gregory Hartwell's face turned purple. You can't do this. I just did. Victor's voice was utterly final. And if you attempt to return to any property I own, you'll be escorted out by security and charged with trespassing. Am I clear? Hartwell stood abruptly, his chair scraping against hardwood. You'll regret this, Romano. Both of you. I have lawyers. So do I. Better ones. Victor's smile was absolutely terrifying. Feel free to pursue legal action. I look forward to deposing you about your history of inappropriate behavior toward women in professional settings. I'm sure your wife will find that testimony fascinating. The threat landed like a physical blow. Hartwell went white, then red, then turned and stalked from the conference room without another word. The remaining board members sat frozen, clearly uncertain whether they'd just witnessed a victory or a preview of what happened when someone crossed Victor Romano. Gentlemen, Victor said, his voice returning to professional courtesy, thank you for your time. Miss Moore and I have work to discuss. You're dismissed. They filed out quickly, leaving Elena alone with Victor in the suddenly quiet conference room. She sat very still, processing what had just happened. Victor had destroyed Gregory Hartwell in less than 15 minutes, not with violence or threats, but with power wielded absolutely, and the willingness to sacrifice revenue for principle. You're upset, Victor observed, settling into the chair beside her. I'm overwhelmed. Elena turned to face him. You just risked your entire board resigning rather than compromise on my behalf. I risked nothing. Those men know their positions depend on my goodwill. They were never going to vote against me. His hand found hers, thumb tracing familiar patterns. But even if they had resigned, I would have found replacements. People are replaceable, Elena. You're not. That's exactly what concerns me. Elena pulled her hand free, needing space to think. That kind of absolute power, that willingness to destroy anyone who threatens me. Victor, that's terrifying. Is it? He leaned back, studying her with those whiskey eyes. Or is it exactly what you needed? Someone finally willing to use their power to protect you instead of exploit you? Elena opened her mouth to argue, then stopped. Because he was right. How many times had she stood alone against men like Hartwell, armed with nothing but her competence and her boundaries? How many times had she wished someone with real power would intervene on her behalf instead of leaving her to fight alone? Victor had just done exactly that. Used his considerable power to ensure she was protected, valued, defended. The fact that his methods were ruthless didn't change the fundamental truth. He'd kept his promise to protect what was his. I'm not used to this, Elena admitted quietly, to someone fighting for me instead of expecting me to fight for myself. I know. Victor pulled her into his lap, cradling her against his chest. But you're going to have to get used to it, because this is who I am, Elena. When someone threatens you, I eliminate the threat. When someone disrespects you, I ensure they face consequences. When someone tries to hurt you, professionally, personally, in any way, I make certain they regret it. That's a lot of intensity. You knew what you were choosing when you said you loved me. His arms tightened possessively. I told you I'm all in. I told you I protect what's mine. This is what that looks like in practice. Elena was quiet for a long moment, letting Victor's words sink in. He was right. She had known. From that first conversation in the service corridor, Victor had been clear about who he was and what loving him would mean. Absolute protection, unwavering loyalty. The full force of his power and resources dedicated to keeping her safe. It was overwhelming. It was intense. It was also exactly what Elena's heart had been craving without her conscious mind acknowledging it. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay, I can accept this. I can accept you being ruthless on my behalf. But Victor, yes? Don't lie to me about it. Don't soften it or hide it to protect me from who you are." She pulled back to meet his eyes directly. "If you're going to destroy someone for threatening me, tell me. Let me choose whether to be part of it or step back. But don't protect me from the truth." Victor's expression shifted to something raw and reverent. "You're extraordinary. Most people would ask me to be gentler, to hold back. You're asking me to be honest about my ruthlessness. Because the ruthlessness is part of who you are. And I love all of you, not just the parts that are easy." Elena cupped his face in her hands. "But I need honesty more than I need protection. Can you give me that?" "Always." He pressed a kiss to her palm. "Complete honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. I promise." They sat together in the quiet conference room, wrapped in each other, and Elena felt something fundamental settle into place. This was partnership. Not one person protecting the other, but two people choosing to face the world together with complete honesty about who they were and what they were capable of. Victor Romano was ruthless, powerful, and absolutely devoted to her protection. Elena Moore was competent, strong, and brave enough to love him anyway. Together, they were something formidable, and anyone foolish enough to threaten what they were building would learn exactly how dangerous that combination could be. The weeks that followed the board meeting settled into a rhythm that felt both exhilarating and terrifying in its intensity. Elena threw herself into her new role with the competence Victor had recognized from the beginning, implementing the harassment policies across all 4 properties and building teams that reflected her commitment to excellence. The work was challenging and satisfying in ways her previous position had never been. But it was the nights that transformed her. Victor courted her with the same absolute focus he brought to everything else. Dinners at Rose's interspersed with cultural events he thought she'd enjoy, long conversations that stretched into the early morning hours, weekends spent exploring the city or simply existing together in comfortable silence. He learned that she loved old movies and jazz music, that she had a weakness for French pastries, that she'd always wanted to learn Italian but never had time. Within a month, Elena had a standing appointment with an Italian tutor Victor had somehow found, a grandmother from Naples who came to his penthouse twice a week and taught Elena while feeding her homemade biscotti. Within 6 weeks, Victor had surprised her with a vintage poster from Casablanca, professionally framed and hung in her apartment while she was at work. Within 2 months, he'd taken her to a private jazz performance at a club in the village where the musicians knew him by name and played her favorite songs without being asked. The man was relentless in his devotion, and Elena found herself falling deeper with each carefully observed preference, each thoughtful gesture that proved he paid attention to everything she said. But it wasn't just the courtship that deepened their connection. It was the way Victor integrated Elena into every aspect of his life with deliberate intention. He brought her to business meetings and asked her opinion, valuing her insights. He introduced her to his lawyers, his accountants, his key advisors as his partner, making it clear she had standing to know everything about his empire. He shared the parts of himself he kept hidden from everyone else, his fears about never being enough, his grief over his mother, his careful navigation between the world he'd come from and the world he'd built. And Elena matched him, vulnerability for vulnerability. She told him about the night she'd gone to bed hungry as a child because her mother forgot to buy groceries, about putting herself through college on scholarships and spite, determined to build something her absent father could never take credit for, about the careful walls she'd constructed around her heart, and how terrifying it was to let Victor dismantle them brick by brick. They were building something that felt permanent, foundational, something that would either last forever or destroy them both when it ended. Elena tried not to think about the second possibility. 3 months into their relationship, Victor asked her to move in with him. They were having dinner at his penthouse, a regular occurrence now, when he set down his wine glass and looked at her with that particular intensity that meant something important was coming. "You spend every night here anyway," he said without preamble. "Your apartment sits empty except for the clothes you haven't moved over yet. It seems inefficient to maintain two residences when we both know where you actually live. Elena's heart kicked up. That's your argument for me moving in? Efficiency? No. Victor's expression softened. My argument is that I wake up every morning wanting you beside me, and I go to sleep every night grateful you chose to stay. My argument is that this penthouse became a home the moment you started leaving your books on my coffee table and your shoes by the door. My argument is that I love you, and I want to make this official, not just emotionally, but practically. He reached across the table to take her hand, his thumb tracing the familiar pattern that had become his particular gesture of devotion. Move in with me, Elena. Not because it's efficient, but because building a life together means sharing space and routines and all the small domestic details that turn a relationship into a partnership. Let me come home to you every night. Let me wake up with you every morning. Let me prove that the intensity I offer isn't going to consume you. It's going to sustain you. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. 3 months ago, she'd been alone by choice, protected by careful boundaries and professional distance. Now she sat across from a man who wanted to build a life with her, who saw her completely and loved her anyway, who offered partnership instead of ownership. Okay, she whispered. Yes, I'll move in with you. Victor's smile was devastating in its unguarded joy. He stood, pulling Elena to her feet and into his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that made her chest ache. This was what it felt like to be cherished, she realized. Not possessed or controlled, but valued so deeply that someone wanted to build their entire life around keeping you safe and happy and loved. They spent that weekend moving Elena's belongings from her Chelsea apartment to Victor's penthouse. Not much, really. Elena had never accumulated the kind of possessions that spoke of permanence. But Victor treated each item like it mattered, finding space for her books among his, hanging her clothes in the closet beside his suits, arranging her small collection of photographs on shelves throughout the apartment. "This is yours now," he said as they stood in the bedroom doorway surveying their combined lives. "Not mine with you as a guest. Ours. Equal ownership, equal say in how we organize it, equal space for who you are." Elena leaned into his side, feeling the solid strength of him. "You're good at this, at making someone feel like they belong." "I've had practice wanting it." Victor pressed a kiss to her temple. "My whole childhood was temporary housing, temporary stability, waiting for the next crisis. When I finally had money, I built spaces that felt permanent, but they were empty until you make this feel like home instead of just an expensive place to sleep." The confession was unexpectedly vulnerable, and Elena turned in his arms to kiss him properly. They made love that night in their shared bedroom, and afterward Elena lay awake listening to Victor's breathing and marveling at how completely her life had changed in 3 short months. She'd gone from alone and protected to partnered and exposed, from fighting every battle herself to having someone who would burn down the world to keep her safe, from carefully controlled independence to the terrifying intimacy of building a life with someone who saw all her vulnerabilities and loved her more for them. It should have felt like losing herself. Instead, it felt like finally becoming whole. The first real test of their partnership came 4 months into their relationship, when Victor invited Elena to Sunday dinner with his extended family. "I need to warn you," he said the week before, his expression somewhere between amused and apprehensive. "My family is large, loud, and will absolutely interrogate you about your intentions toward me. They take the concept of family very seriously, and they've been waiting for me to bring someone home for years." Elena felt her stomach tighten. How many people are we talking about? 30, maybe 40? Cousins, aunts, uncles, various relatives who aren't technically family but might as well be. "We do Sunday dinner once a month at my cousin Marco's restaurant in the Bronx." Victor pulled her into his arms, sensing her tension. "But Elena, you don't have to do this if you're not ready. I can make excuses." "No." Elena cut him off firmly. "If this is important to you, if these people matter to you, then I want to meet them. I'm just nervous about making a good impression." "You'll make an excellent impression by being exactly who you are." Victor's voice carried absolute conviction. "They'll see what I see, someone brilliant and strong and brave enough to love me despite knowing exactly who I am." The Sunday in question arrived cold and bright, early December turning Manhattan streets crystalline with frost. Elena dressed with care, settling on dark jeans and a cashmere sweater. Nice enough to show respect, casual enough to fit with Victor's description of his family. She left her hair down because Victor loved it that way, and wore minimal jewelry except for the delicate gold bracelet he'd given her for her birthday last week. The drive to the Bronx took 40 minutes, Victor's hand warm in hers the entire time. He pointed out landmarks from his childhood, the school he'd attended, the park where he'd learned to fight, the corner where his mother used to wait for the bus to her night shift. Each memory shared felt like another piece of Victor revealing himself, showing Elena the foundation of who he'd become. Marco's restaurant was a sprawling space that took up half a block, clearly expanded over years as the family grew. Even from outside, Elena could hear the noise, laughter, multiple conversations in Italian and English, children shrieking with delight. Victor squeezed her hand reassuringly before opening the door. The chaos that greeted them was overwhelming. At least 40 people filled the restaurant, spread across multiple tables pushed together in the center of the space. Food covered every available surface: platters of pasta, roasted vegetables, fresh bread, meats that smelled incredible. Wine flowed freely, and the conversations happened at volumes that suggested everyone was slightly deaf. The moment Victor appeared, the noise level somehow increased. People surged forward, embracing him with the kind of physical affection that spoke of genuine love. He returned the hugs with obvious warmth, accepting kisses on both cheeks from elderly women and good-natured ribbing from men his age. And then his hand found Elena's, drawing her forward into the chaos. "Everyone," Victor's voice cut through the din with practiced authority. "This is Elena, my partner, the woman I love. And I expect you to treat her with the same respect you show me, which means no embarrassing stories, no inappropriate questions, and definitely no interrogation about when we're getting married." The last part was directed at a tiny elderly woman who Elena immediately recognized as Rosa from the Brooklyn restaurant. Rosa sniffed dismissively. "Married, not married, what does it matter? You love her, she loves you, that's enough." She turned her sharp eyes on Elena. "You, come here. Let me look at you properly." Elena stepped forward, submitting to another one of Rosa's thorough inspections. The old woman took her face in both hands, turning it side to side as if examining precious merchandise. "Good bones, strong eyes. You don't smile when you're nervous, that's smart. Smiling makes people think you're weak." Rosa released Elena and nodded with satisfaction. "She'll do, Vittorio. Better than you deserve, probably, but she'll do." The tension broke into laughter, and suddenly Elena found herself surrounded by Victor's family. His cousin Marco, who owned the restaurant and looked like a younger, friendlier version of Victor. His aunt Carlotta, who immediately insisted Elena call her Zia and promised to teach her how to make proper Sunday gravy. Countless cousins and their children, all talking over each other and asking questions and arguing about whether to open more wine. It was overwhelming and loud and absolutely nothing like the quiet, controlled dinners Elena had grown accustomed to with Victor. It was also warm and genuine and filled with the kind of unconditional acceptance Elena had never experienced from her own fractured family. Victor kept her close throughout the meal, his hand on her back or their shoulders touching, making sure she never felt abandoned in the chaos. But he also gave her space to connect with his family on her own terms, watching with obvious pleasure as his aunt taught Elena a Sicilian drinking toast, and his young cousins showed her photos on their phones, and Marco insisted she try every dish he'd prepared. Halfway through dinner, Rosa appeared at Elena's elbow with 2 glasses of limoncello. "Walk with me," the old woman commanded. "I want to talk to you without all these loud people interrupting." Elena glanced at Victor, who nodded encouragingly. She followed Rosa through the restaurant to a small back patio that overlooked a garden, somehow still maintained despite the December cold. "You know what Vittorio does," Rosa said without preamble. "The businesses he runs, the people he knows, the world he came from, and the world he built. Yes?" "Yes," Elena said carefully. "He's been honest with me about his past." "Good. Honesty is important." Rosa handed Elena one of the limoncello glasses. "I knew his mother, Maria. She was my friend. We worked together cleaning hotels when we first came to America. I watched that boy grow up with nothing, watched him fight to give his mother a better life, watched him become the man he is now. She paused, her old eyes sharp and assessing. Maria used to worry that Vittorio would never let anyone close, that he built walls too high for love to climb. She wanted him to find someone strong enough to match him, brave enough to stand beside him, smart enough to call him on his bullshit when he needed it. Rosa smiled slightly. I think she would have loved you. Elena's throat tightened with unexpected emotion. Thank you. That means a lot. But I need to know something. Rosa's voice turned serious. You know what it means to love a man like Vittorio? The protection comes with possession. The devotion comes with intensity. He will never be easy or simple or casual. Are you prepared for that? For all of it? Elena thought about the past 4 months. The overwhelming force of Victor's love, his absolute commitment to her safety and happiness, his ruthless elimination of anything that threatened her, the way he looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world, the careful way he'd built a life around keeping her loved and protected and free to be exactly who she was. I'm prepared, Elena said quietly. I love him. All of him, the protection and the possession, the devotion and the intensity. I wouldn't want him any other way. Rosa studied her for a long moment, then nodded with satisfaction. Good. Then I give you my blessing for whatever that's worth to you. She raised her limoncello glass. To Maria Romano's son, and the woman brave enough to love him, may you build something that lasts. They clinked glasses and drank, the sweet liquor burning pleasantly all the way down. When they returned to the main dining room, Victor's eyes found Elena immediately, a silent question in his expression. Elena smiled and nodded, and she watched the tension drain from his shoulders. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of food and wine and laughter. Victor's family embraced Elena with the same unconditional warmth they showed him, treating her like she'd always been part of the fabric of their lives. By the time they left, well past midnight, Elena had collected at least a dozen invitations to various family events and 3 separate offers to teach her traditional Sicilian recipes. That went well, Victor said as they drove back toward Manhattan. His voice carried relief and something deeper, gratitude, maybe, that his family had accepted the woman he loved. Your family is wonderful. Elena leaned her head against his shoulder. Loud and chaotic and wonderful. Rosa told me your mother would have approved of me. Victor's arm tightened around her. She would have loved you, would have seen what I see, someone who makes me better just by existing in my life. Rosa also warned me about what it means to love you, the possession that comes with the protection. And? Victor's voice was carefully neutral, but Elena heard the tension beneath. And I told her I'm prepared for all of it. Elena turned to face him. Because I am, Victor. I know who you are. I know what loving you means. And I choose it anyway, choose you anyway, because what we have is worth the intensity. Victor pulled her into a kiss that tasted like limoncello and promise, deep and possessive and absolutely devastating. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers. I'm going to marry you, he said, the word somewhere between vow and prediction. Maybe not tomorrow or next month, but eventually. Because you're it for me, Elena. The only woman I'll ever love this completely. The only person I'll ever trust with all the parts of myself I keep hidden from everyone else. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. Is that a proposal? It's a warning. Victor's smile was wicked. When I do propose, it'll be with a ring and a plan and absolute certainty that you're going to say yes. This is just me making sure you know what's coming. I think I can handle the suspense. Elena kissed him again, softer this time. As long as you're patient enough to let me catch up to where you are. I'll wait as long as you need. Victor's voice carried absolute conviction. Because what we're building is permanent, Elena. The kind of permanent that lasts lifetimes. They spent the rest of the drive home wrapped in each other, and when they finally reached the penthouse, Victor made love to Elena with a tenderness that felt like worship. Afterward, lying in their bed with Manhattan glittering beyond the windows, Elena felt something fundamental settle into certainty. This was her life now. This man, this partnership, this overwhelming intensity that had transformed her from alone and protected to loved and exposed. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, but it was also exactly what Elena's heart had been searching for without her conscious mind acknowledging it. Someone who saw her completely. Someone who loved her anyway. Someone strong enough to protect her, but wise enough to let her be strong. Victor Romano had crashed into her life 4 months ago and systematically dismantled every careful wall she'd built around her heart. And instead of feeling destroyed, Elena felt freed. Free to love without reservation, free to trust someone with her vulnerabilities, free to build something permanent with a man who valued her strength as much as he provided his own. The next morning, Elena woke to find Victor already awake, watching her with an expression of such profound tenderness that her breath caught. "What?" she asked, her voice still rough with sleep. "Just thinking about how my life changed the night you slapped Hartwell's hand away." Victor traced her cheekbone with gentle fingers. "How one moment of you refusing to compromise yourself gave me an excuse to finally introduce myself. How lucky I am that you were brave enough to let me in." "I think we're both brave." Elena caught his hand, pressing a kiss to his palm. "It takes courage to love this intensely, to trust someone enough to show them everything, the good and the bad and the complicated. Then we'll be brave together." Victor pulled her close, and Elena settled against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "Starting with breakfast. I'm making pancakes." "You're making pancakes?" Elena couldn't hide her surprise. "Rosa gave me her recipe last night, said if I'm going to keep you, I need to learn to cook more than eggs." Victor's voice carried amusement. "Apparently feeding you properly is part of my job as your partner." Elena laughed, the sound bright and unguarded. This was what partnership looked like. Not grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but Sunday morning pancakes and shared recipes and the comfortable certainty of building a life together, one small decision at a time. They spent the rest of the day in lazy domesticity, cooking together and watching old movies and existing in the comfortable silence that came from knowing someone completely. And when evening fell and they stood together on the balcony overlooking Central Park, Elena felt the last of her careful reservations dissolve. She'd spent years protecting herself from exactly this kind of overwhelming love. But standing there with Victor's arms around her and Manhattan glittering below them like a promise, Elena finally understood what she'd been missing. Safety wasn't the absence of risk. It was finding someone worth risking everything for. And Victor Romano was worth every risk Elena had ever taken and every wall she'd ever let him dismantle. He was worth the terrifying vulnerability of being completely known, worth the overwhelming intensity of being absolutely loved, worth building a life around and growing old with and trusting with all the tender, protected parts of herself she'd kept hidden for so long. "I love you," Elena said quietly, the words carrying more weight than they ever had before. Not just affection or attachment, but total commitment, the promise of permanence, the certainty that this man, this partnership, this overwhelming intensity was exactly what she'd been waiting for without knowing it. "I love you too." Victor's arms tightened around her, possessive and protective and absolutely devoted. "More than I thought possible. More than I have words for, just completely, permanently, unshakably yours." They stood together as the sun set over Manhattan, two people who'd found in each other what they'd been missing without knowing it was missing. Competence met integrity. Strength met protection. Independence met devotion. And somewhere in the synthesis of two careful, controlled people choosing to be vulnerable with each other, something extraordinary was being built. Something permanent. Something unbreakable. Something that would last lifetimes. 6 months after that Sunday dinner with Victor's family, Elena stood in the executive offices reviewing quarterly reports when Marcus appeared in her doorway with an expression that immediately put her on alert. "We have a situation," he said quietly. "Someone's been asking questions about you and Mr. Romano, a reporter from the Post claiming to be working on a piece about the club's harassment policies." Elena's stomach dropped. "What kind of questions?" "About your relationship, about whether the harassment policy was created to protect you specifically, about whether your promotion was merit-based or," Marcus paused delicately, "otherwise motivated." The implication was clear and ugly. Someone was trying to paint Elena as a woman who'd slept her way into a position she hadn't earned, and Victor as a man who'd abused his power to secure a relationship. It was exactly the kind of narrative that would destroy everything they'd built, both professionally and personally. "Does Victor know?" I informed him 10 minutes ago. He asked me to bring you to his office immediately. Elena followed Marcus up to the penthouse level, her mind racing through scenarios. This was the nightmare she'd been half expecting since the beginning, the moment when their relationship became public in the worst possible way, when all her competence and hard work would be reduced to salacious gossip about sleeping with the boss. Victor stood by his windows, perfectly still in that way that meant he was absolutely furious. He turned as Elena entered, and she saw the controlled rage in his eyes. "Tell me," she said without preamble. A reporter named Jennifer Chen contacted 3 former Meridian Club employees asking about our relationship timeline. When you were promoted, when we started dating, whether there were rumors about favoritism. Victor's voice was deadly calm. She also contacted Gregory Hartwell. Elena felt ice slide down her spine. What did he tell her? That you seduced me to secure your position. That the harassment policy was created after the fact to justify terminating his membership when he discovered the affair. That I'm using my power to protect you from consequences of professional misconduct. Victor's jaw tightened. It's all lies, but it's the kind of story tabloids love. Powerful man, beautiful employee, accusations of impropriety. So what do we do? Elena forced herself to remain calm despite the panic clawing at her chest. Deny it? Ignore it? Hire lawyers? We get ahead of it. Victor crossed to his desk, pulling out a folder. I've already spoken with my PR team and legal counsel. We have several options, but I wanted your input before making any decisions. He handed Elena the folder, and she scanned the contents quickly. Option 1 was a carefully worded statement confirming their relationship while emphasizing the timeline. Elena's promotion had been decided before they'd started dating. Their personal relationship had developed separately from her professional advancement. Option 2 was more aggressive, threatening legal action against the Post for defamation if they published unverified accusations. Option 3 was the nuclear approach, a full press conference where Victor and Elena would present documentation proving her competence and the legitimacy of their relationship. What do you think? Victor asked quietly. Elena set down the folder, meeting his eyes directly. I think we tell the truth. Not because we owe anyone an explanation, but because I won't let Gregory Hartwell's lies define who we are or what we've built. A press conference could get ugly. Reporters will ask invasive questions about our personal life, about my past, about whether I've ever used my position to pursue other relationships. Victor's voice was careful, giving her an out if she wanted it. Are you prepared for that level of scrutiny? Elena thought about the past 6 months, the way Victor had integrated her into every aspect of his life with absolute transparency. The family dinners and business meetings and quiet domestic moments that had built something real and permanent between them. The careful way he'd always maintained boundaries between her professional achievements and their personal relationship. I'm prepared, she said firmly. Because the truth is on our side, Victor. You promoted me before we started dating. I've exceeded every performance metric in my role. Our relationship developed organically, without any abuse of power or impropriety. And I refuse to be ashamed of loving you, or let anyone suggest that my competence is somehow invalidated because I'm in a relationship with you. Victor's expression shifted to something raw and proud. You're sure? Once we go public, we can't take it back. Your privacy, your professional reputation, it'll all be subject to scrutiny. I'm sure. Elena moved into his arms, feeling the solid strength of him. We've built something real. Something based on mutual respect and genuine partnership. I won't let lies destroy that, and I won't hide what we have like it's something shameful. Victor held her close, his cheek pressed to her hair. Then we do this together. Full transparency, complete honesty, and let the chips fall where they may. The press conference was scheduled for the following afternoon in the main ballroom of the Meridian Club. Victor's PR team worked through the night preparing materials, Elena's resume and performance reviews, documentation of the harassment policy development timeline, statements from board members confirming the separation between Elena's promotion and their personal relationship. Elena barely slept, running through potential questions and responses, trying to prepare for every angle of attack. Victor stayed with her through the night, his presence solid and reassuring, reminding her that they were facing this together. By the time they arrived at the club the next day, at least 20 reporters had gathered, cameras ready, notepads out. Elena wore a navy suit that spoke of professional authority. Her hair pulled back, minimal jewelry except for the gold bracelet Victor had given her. She looked like exactly what she was, a competent professional who'd earned her position through hard work and excellence. Victor stood beside her in a dark suit, his hand warm against the small of her back as they approached the podium. The subtle touch was both possessive and supportive, a reminder that whatever happened, they faced it together. "Thank you for coming," Victor began, his voice carrying the controlled authority Elena had come to recognize. "I've called this press conference to address recent speculation about my relationship with Elena Moore, the director of operations for my Manhattan properties. Rather than allow rumors and innuendo to shape the narrative, we've chosen to provide complete transparency about our professional and personal relationship." He nodded to Elena, who stepped forward with documents in hand. "I was promoted to director of operations on the basis of 3 years of exemplary performance at the Meridian Club, plus extensive experience in luxury hospitality management," Elena said clearly. "My resume, performance reviews, and letters of recommendation are available for your review. The decision to promote me was made 6 weeks before Victor Romano and I began dating, as documented in board meeting minutes and employment records." She handed copies to the nearest reporters, watching them scan the materials. "Victor and I began our personal relationship after I'd accepted the position, with clear boundaries established to prevent any conflict of interest. I report directly to him professionally, but all performance evaluations are reviewed by an independent board committee to ensure objectivity. My compensation is determined by industry standards and verified metrics, not personal favoritism." A reporter from the Post raised her hand, Jennifer Chen, the woman who'd been asking questions. "Ms. Moore, Gregory Hartwell claims you initiated a relationship with Mr. Romano, specifically to secure your promotion and protect yourself from consequences after the gala incident. How do you respond to that?" Elena met the reporter's eyes without flinching. "Mr. Hartwell sexually harassed me during a charity event by touching me without permission and using demeaning language. I established a boundary and enforced consequences, as is my right and responsibility. His membership was terminated because he violated workplace harassment policies, not because of my personal relationship with Victor Romano, which didn't exist at that time. Mr. Hartwell's accusations are retaliation for facing legitimate consequences for inappropriate behavior." "But the harassment policy was implemented after the incident," another reporter interjected. "Doesn't that suggest it was created specifically to justify terminating Mr. Hartwell?" Victor stepped forward, his voice cutting through the noise with absolute authority. "The harassment policy formalized standards that should have been in place from the beginning. Mr. Hartwell's behavior would have been unacceptable regardless of whether a written policy existed. And I want to be very clear about something. I don't need to create policies to justify protecting my staff from sexual harassment. That's called basic human decency." "Mr. Romano," Jennifer Chen pressed, "given your documented history with organized crime families, isn't it possible that your relationship with Ms. Moore represents a pattern of using power inappropriately? That you've leveraged your position to pursue a romantic relationship with an employee who couldn't refuse without jeopardizing her career?" The question was designed to wound, to paint Victor as a predator and Elena as a victim. Elena felt rage flash through her, white-hot and clarifying. She stepped forward before Victor could respond. "I'm going to address this directly because I won't allow my agency to be erased by your narrative," Elena said, her voice sharp enough to cut. "I chose to pursue a relationship with Victor Romano, not because I felt pressured or coerced, but because I recognized in him someone who valued my competence, respected my boundaries, and saw me as an equal partner rather than a subordinate. He offered me a promotion based purely on merit, then separately expressed personal interest while making it absolutely clear that the two were unconnected, that I could accept the job and decline the relationship without any professional consequences." She looked directly at Jennifer Chen, letting the reporter see the conviction in her eyes. "I'm not a victim who needs saving from a powerful man. I'm a competent professional who earned my position and then chose to build a personal relationship with someone who treats me with respect, honesty, and absolute partnership. The fact that you're trying to paint that choice as exploitation says more about your assumptions about women's agency than it does about my relationship." The ballroom had gone silent. Elena could feel Victor's pride radiating from beside her, his hand finding hers in a gesture of solidarity. "Any other questions?" Victor's voice carried a dangerous edge. Because I'm happy to discuss my business practices, my professional ethics, or my relationship with Elena. But if you're here to perpetuate Gregory Hartwell's lies or suggest that my partner is somehow incapable of making her own informed decisions, we're done. A younger reporter from a business publication raised his hand tentatively. Ms. Moore, what metrics have you achieved in your role as Director of Operations? Elena felt the tension ease slightly as she launched into concrete details. Staff retention improvements, revenue increases across all properties, successful implementation of new policies that had become industry models. She spoke with confidence and precision, demonstrating exactly why she'd been promoted, her competence undeniable and well documented. The press conference lasted another 40 minutes, with questions ranging from professional to personal, some respectful, and others clearly designed to provoke. But Elena and Victor handled each one with united front, honest about their relationship, transparent about the timeline, unwavering in their presentation of the facts. By the time they finished, Elena felt exhausted but strangely exhilarated. They'd laid everything out in the open, had refused to hide or apologize, had presented their relationship as exactly what it was, a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine love. The media coverage over the next few days was mixed. Some outlets focused on the romance angle, painting them as a modern fairy tale of boss and employee turned partners. Others were more cynical, questioning whether true consent could exist in relationships with power imbalances. A few, including The Post, tried to keep the scandal alive by interviewing Gregory Hartwell again and rehashing old rumors about Victor's past. But the one thing no one could dispute was Elena's competence. The documentation they'd provided was too thorough, her achievements too concrete. Even the most skeptical reporters had to acknowledge that she'd earned her position on merit. 3 weeks after the press conference, Elena was working late in her office when Victor appeared in her doorway with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Come with me," he said. "There's something I want to show you." Elena followed him to the private elevator, which carried them not to the penthouse but to the roof. She'd never been up here before. It was technically off limits except for maintenance. But when the elevator doors opened, Elena gasped. The entire rooftop had been transformed. String lights hung in elegant patterns overhead, creating a canopy of golden light. A table was set for two with Rosa's distinctive red-checkered tablecloth, candles flickering in the Manhattan breeze. And everywhere, absolutely everywhere, were flowers. Roses and peonies and lilies, creating a garden in the sky. "Victor," Elena breathed, "what is this?" "This is me finally doing what I've wanted to do since the day you moved in with me." Victor took her hand, leading her to the center of the rooftop garden. "This is me making good on the warning I gave you 6 months ago." He dropped to one knee and Elena's breath stopped completely. "Elena Moore, you walked into my life and systematically destroyed every careful wall I'd built around my heart. You challenged me, matched me, refused to be anything other than exactly who you are, brilliant and strong and brave enough to love someone like me." Victor's voice was rough with emotion. "You've made me better, made my life meaningful in ways I didn't know were possible. Made me understand that real power isn't about control. It's about partnership with someone strong enough to stand beside you as an equal." He pulled out a small velvet box, opening it to reveal a ring that caught the candlelight and threw it back in prismatic brilliance. The center stone was a deep red ruby surrounded by diamonds, unusual, distinctive, absolutely perfect. "I'm asking you to marry me, to build a life with me permanently and officially, to let me spend the rest of my life protecting you, cherishing you, and being constantly amazed by your strength." Victor's eyes held hers with absolute intensity. "I'm all in, Elena. Completely, permanently, unshakably yours. The question is whether you're ready to be all in with me." Elena felt tears streaming down her face, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. 6 months ago, she'd been alone by choice, protected by careful boundaries and professional distance. Now she stood on a rooftop garden with a man who'd proven every day that his intensity wasn't consumption but devotion, that his protection came without possession, that his love meant partnership rather than ownership. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you. I'm all in too, completely, permanently, unshakably in love with you." Victor's smile was absolutely devastating as he slid the ring onto her finger. Then he stood, pulling Elena into his arms and kissing her with a passion that made the world disappear. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers. "The ruby is from my mother's jewelry," he said quietly. "The only piece she kept through all the hard years because it reminded her of home. She told me to give it to someone who understood that real wealth has nothing to do with money. Someone who valued integrity over comfort. Someone strong enough to build something permanent." Elena looked down at the ring through tear-blurred eyes, overwhelmed by the significance of the gift. "She would have loved you seeing me this happy. Seeing you this happy." "She would have loved you," Victor corrected, "for exactly the same reasons I do." They had dinner under the string lights, Rosa's food somehow transported to the rooftop, along with wine from Victor's private collection. They talked about wedding plans and the future, and all the small details of building a life together. And when Manhattan's lights twinkled below them like a celebration, Elena felt the last piece of her careful control surrender to the overwhelming rightness of this choice. She was going to marry Victor Romano, was going to build a permanent life with a man who'd proven every day that intensity and devotion could coexist with respect and partnership, was going to trust him with all the vulnerable, protected parts of herself and know they were safe. The wedding happened 3 months later, in early spring when Central Park was alive with new growth. Elena had initially suggested something small and private, but Victor's family had other ideas. What started as intimate plans evolved into a celebration of two families coming together, Victor's large, loud, loving extended family, and the smaller circle Elena had built from chosen connections rather than blood. Rosa, of course, insisted on catering. Zia Carlotta made Elena's veil by hand, intricate lace that had been in their family for generations. Victor's cousin Marco turned his restaurant into command central for wedding planning, and somehow the chaos of 40 opinionated Italians all trying to help resulted in something beautiful. The ceremony took place in a small garden in Central Park, officiated by a judge Victor knew who owed him a favor. Elena wore a simple ivory gown that spoke of elegance rather than ostentation, her hair loose because Victor loved it that way, the ruby ring he'd given her catching spring sunlight and throwing red fire. Victor stood at the altar in a dark suit, his eyes never leaving Elena as she walked toward him. There was no one to give her away. She'd never needed anyone's permission to make her own choices. But Rosa and Zia Carlotta walked beside her anyway, representing the family she'd found rather than the one she'd been born into. The vows they exchanged were traditional on the surface but carried weight beyond the words. When Elena promised to love and cherish, she meant it with every fiber of her being, this man who'd seen her completely and loved her anyway, who'd protected without possessing, who'd made her brave enough to surrender her careful control. When Victor promised to honor and respect, his voice carried absolute conviction. This woman who'd matched his intensity, challenged his assumptions, made him understand that real partnership meant celebrating strength rather than trying to contain it. The kiss they shared when the judge pronounced them married was deep and possessive and absolutely perfect, Victor's hand cradling Elena's face with devastating gentleness while his other arm held her close. When they finally broke apart, the garden erupted in cheers and applause, Victor's family celebrating with characteristic exuberance. The reception that followed was exactly what Elena should have expected. Loud, joyful chaos at Marco's restaurant, with food that never stopped coming and wine that flowed freely and dancing that lasted into the early morning hours. Elena was pulled into a dozen different conversations, embraced by Victor's aunts, taught traditional dances by his cousins, welcomed into the family with an unconditional warmth that made her chest ache. But the moment that mattered most came late in the evening, when Victor pulled Elena onto the dance floor for a slow song while their families watched with knowing smiles. "How are you holding up, Mrs. Romano?" Victor's voice was warm with amusement and satisfaction. Elena smiled against his shoulder. "Overwhelmed, exhausted, completely happy. You?" "Grateful." He pulled back slightly to look at her, his expression so tender it made Elena's breath catch. "Grateful that you slapped Hartwell's hand away and gave me an excuse to introduce myself. Grateful that you were brave enough to let me in. Grateful that you chose to build this life with me, even knowing exactly how intense and complicated it would be." "I'd choose you again," Elena said softly. "Every time, in every lifetime." You're worth the intensity, Victor, worth the vulnerability, worth every risk I took to let you past my walls. Victor's kiss was gentle this time, reverent, a promise of all the years ahead. When the song ended and their families applauded, Elena felt something settle deep in her bones, the certainty that this was exactly where she belonged. The months that followed their wedding were a masterclass in partnership. Elena continued excelling in her role as director of operations, her competence now undeniable to even the most skeptical observers. The press had moved on to other scandals, and Gregory Hartwell had faded into irrelevance after his own wife filed for divorce, citing a pattern of inappropriate behavior. Victor expanded his business empire with Elena's input, valuing her strategic insights and trusting her judgment in ways that made her feel genuinely valued. They navigated the complexities of working together and living together with the same honest communication that had defined their relationship from the beginning. There were challenges, of course, moments when Victor's protective instincts clashed with Elena's need for independence, times when Elena's careful control frustrated Victor's desire for emotional openness. But they learned to navigate these conflicts with mutual respect and genuine effort to understand each other's perspective. 1 year after their wedding, Elena stood in the same ballroom where she'd first confronted Gregory Hartwell and felt the full circle of transformation. She was hosting the annual Sinclair Foundation Gala again, but this time as Victor's wife, as a woman who'd proven her competence beyond doubt, as someone who'd learned that strength and vulnerability could coexist. Victor appeared at her elbow midway through the evening, his hand finding its familiar place at the small of her back. "Everything perfect?" he asked. "Everything's perfect," Elena confirmed. "The new harassment policy is working beautifully. We haven't had a single incident in over a year. Staff morale is the highest it's been since we started tracking it, and the event is running exactly on schedule." "I wasn't asking about the event." Victor turned her to face him, his eyes warm with affection. "I was asking about you." Elena felt her heart swell with love for this man who saw past professional excellence to the person beneath, who cared more about her happiness than any business outcome. "I'm perfect too," she said softly. "Happy, fulfilled, loved. Everything I didn't know I was missing until you crashed into my life and refused to let me hide." "Good." Victor pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Because you deserve to be happy. Deserve to be loved exactly as you are. Brilliant and strong and brave enough to take a chance on someone like me." They stood together in the glittering ballroom, surrounded by Manhattan's elite, and Elena marveled at how completely her life had changed. 2 years ago, she'd been alone by choice, protected by careful walls and professional distance. Now she stood as Victor Romano's wife and partner, someone who'd learned that the most terrifying thing, surrendering control to someone who'd proven worthy of trust, was also the most freeing. She'd built a life of extraordinary success. Not just professionally, though her career had flourished beyond her wildest expectations, but personally. She'd found someone who saw her completely and loved her anyway, who protected without possessing, who celebrated her strength rather than trying to diminish it. Victor Romano had warned her from the beginning that his intensity could be overwhelming, but what Elena discovered was that his intensity matched her own in ways she'd never acknowledged. She wasn't gentle or casual about the things she cared about either. She was focused and driven and absolutely committed to excellence in everything she touched. Finding someone who matched that intensity, who understood it and honored it rather than being threatened by it, had transformed Elena in ways she was still discovering. She was softer now in some ways, more willing to be vulnerable and ask for help. But she was also stronger, fortified by the certainty that she had a partner who would stand beside her through anything. As the gala wound down and guests began their elegant departures, Elena and Victor stood together on the balcony overlooking Fifth Avenue. The spring night was warm, and Manhattan glittered below them like a promise kept. "What are you thinking?" Victor asked, pulling Elena close. "That I'm grateful," she said honestly. "Grateful for that night when everything changed. Grateful that you were watching. Grateful that you gave me the space to choose you freely. Grateful for all of it. The intensity and the partnership and the life we've built." "I'm the grateful one." Victor's voice was rough with emotion. "You could have chosen safety and distance, could have kept your walls intact and protected yourself from risk, but you chose to be brave instead, chose to let me in. chose to build something permanent with a man who loved you too intensely to ever be easy or simple. You're exactly complicated enough, Elena said, rising on her toes to kiss him. Exactly intense enough. Exactly perfect for me in all your imperfect, complicated, overwhelming glory. They stood wrapped in each other as the city hummed around them, two people who'd found in each other what they'd been missing without knowing it was missing. Competence had met integrity. Strength had met protection. Independence had met devotion. And in the synthesis of two careful, controlled people choosing to be vulnerable with each other, something extraordinary had been built. Something permanent, something unbreakable, something that would last lifetimes. Elena Moore, now Elena Romano, had learned that power wasn't about control or protection or maintaining careful distance. Real power was choosing to be vulnerable with someone strong enough to handle your strength. Real power was surrendering to love with someone who would never abuse that surrender. Real power was building a partnership based on absolute equality and mutual devotion. And standing there in Victor's arms with Manhattan spread before them like a kingdom they'd built together, Elena finally understood what her careful, protected younger self had been missing. Safety wasn't the absence of risk. It was finding someone worth risking everything for. Victor Romano had been worth every risk, worth every wall she'd dismantled, worth every moment of vulnerability and exposure and terrifying intimacy. He was worth the intensity that could have consumed her but instead had freed her. And Elena would spend the rest of her life grateful that she'd been brave enough to choose him, to let him choose her back, and to build something permanent from the ashes of her careful control. This was what happily ever after looked like. Not perfect or simple, but real and permanent and built on the foundation of two people choosing each other every single day. Choosing partnership over independence. Choosing vulnerability over protection. Choosing love fierce enough to last lifetimes. Elena rested her head against Victor's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and smiled into the Manhattan night. She'd found her equal, her partner, her home, and she would never, ever let him go.